So hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to So we are back with a brand new movie onward if Harry Potter became the overpowered nose god. But before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story.
Wept for the poor, innocent child being buried. At least that's what Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore thought to himself as he listened to the minister conducting the sermon. Dumbledore felt sick. It was his fault this was happening. No, he had not been the one to actually kill the boy. But it had been on his recommendation that he ended up in that house. He remembered the events that had led to that recommendation all too clearly. It was the 1st of November 1981, and Dumbledore was still trying to understand what had occurred the night before. It seemed Tom had decided that it was the Potters the prophecy referred to. Thankfully all four had survived the attack that had cost Tom his life, if what the man had could still be called life. Let's see. He spoke aloud to the mostly empty room, trying to organize his thoughts. James went down first. He was banished into a wall and rendered unconscious. That was in the sitting room. Then Tom confronted Lily in the nursery. She said she pleaded with him and he seemed reluctant to kill her, in the end just stunning her. Most likely due to his promise to Severus. Here he stopped again, took a lemon drop from the bowl on his desk and popped into his mouth. From here it becomes guesswork. Young Harry seems unharmed, if unusually tired. Darren on the other hand, shows traces of the killing curse and some kind of ancient protection. Both focused on the small, almost stylized cut on his forehead. He was struck, clearly marked, and has powerful magic protecting him. Yes, Darren is the child mentioned in the prophecy. Lily had been mining old texts relating to protection and sacrifice. Could her willingness to die for the boys have shielded them? Why? Why would such an act do that? Could it be? Could the power Tom knows not really be love? Here Dumbledore turned to face the other occupant of his office. Fawkes looked at the blathering twit. It was a burning day and he wasn't in the mood to think about those boys. Even if it wasn't a burning day he wouldn't be in the mood to think about them. Something seemed off about the older one. Like he knew the boy from somewhere and should be worried about the boy recognizing him. Hell, the only reason he hung around was the castle was because it was the most warded place on this wretched island. Fawkes only hoped it was enough to shield his location from him. Great, the old man wanted an answer. Fawkes chirped once. Dumbledore took it as a sign of agreement. He left to meet with the Potters, who were currently being cared for by Pomfrey in the hospital wing. It was the 19th of February 1985, and Dumbledore was sitting in the kitchen of the house the Potters had bought to replace the cottage in Godric's Hollow. James was worried about young Harry. Since the attack he had shown no sign of any magical ability. When Dumbledore pointed out the boy was still young, James had countered with the fact that Harry's first burst of accidental magic was when he had been only a week old. James was now worried that something was wrong with him. Dumbledore agreed to look into it. He needed to keep on the Potter's good side if he wished to guide young Darren down the path of light. After several standard EAMS and getting permission to use on old magical ability identifier, something he hadn't wished to use as it tended to hurt the person it was cast on a lot. Dumbledore found himself explaining to Lily and James that, despite the early magic, Harry was a squib. In fact, the spell's results point towards him being completely Muggle, as squibs at least have small traces of magic that allows them to resist Muggle-repelling charms and such. He explained. Harry, however, seems to lack even that low level. I don't know what to say. This is worrying news, however. I assume the threats are still coming. Yes, not as frequent, but those that arrive are even worse than previous ones. Lily answered. What should we do, Professor? I am worried. The threats focused at Darren are horrible, but the ones aimed at yourselves and Harry trouble me greatly. Especially the ones for Harry now that this has been discovered. His voice was grave as he spoke. Perhaps it would be best if you left Britain for a time. Let the ministry deal with whoever is sending them. You may also want to consider finding someone to keep Harry safe while you are gone. What? Lily shrieked. Why won't we be taking Harry? His magical levels are too low to safely travel by port key or flow. Dumbledore told her. To even try could cause serious damage to him. It's the same reason children under a certain age shouldn't be transported using them. Well, Padfoot or Mooney would be glad to look after him. James spoke up, although his tone displayed his unease with the idea. I feel that leaving Harry in a less magical environment would be better, that way wards to block the owls delivering the threats won't interfere with his guardian's daily life. It would also help him in the long term to see people coping without magic or able to lead happy lives. Dumbledore replied. I guess we could ask Petunia. I mean, it won't be for that long, will it? Lily said. Flashback end that had been the last time Dumbledore had seen young Harry alive. Dumbledore looked over at the Potters who stood across the grave from him. James had one hand on Darren's shoulder, the other around Lily. If it to comfort her or help keep her upright, he didn't know. Little Jennifer, born only a few weeks ago, was in her mother's arms. The Potters were flanked by Sirius Black, to Dumbledore's left, and Remus Lupin, to Dumbledore's right. Both held umbrellas over the grief-stricken family. Dumbledore looked away as the minister finished and coffin was slowly lowered into the grave. As much as he wished he could stop them, the memories continued to come. The 27th of December 1988, the date a sweet, innocent and kind boy died. When Dumbledore had created the wards around the Dursley home, he included several that would alert him if Harry or anyone in the house was in mortal danger. These spells triggered, but no one was there to alert Dumbledore. Fawkes had gone through a premature burning day and so was in no state to contact him. It wasn't until Dumbledore arrived back to his office and the collapse of the wards occurred that he realized what was happening. He rushed to the fire and flowed to little old Arabella Figg's home. She lived in the area and allowed him to pass through if needs be. Calling out for her to contact the authorities and send them to number 4, he rushed out the front door. From there Dumbledore reached the Dursley home in under a minute. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. Petunia screaming at her husband who was standing over the lifeless body of young Harry, holding a fire poker that was stained with blood. What have you done? Dumbledore roared. He attacked Dudley. I couldn't let him hurt my boy. Vernon spluttered out, deathly afraid of the raging wizard before him. He then made the mistake of meeting the aged headmaster's eye. Dumbledore's legitimacy showed that really happened. Vernon had been cleaning out the fireplace when Harry entered the room to tidy. Dudley, who had been sitting on the couch at the time, had started calling Harry names and mocking how his parents didn't love him. As Harry passed, Dudley kicked him and Harry kicked back. The boy had screamed and cried, prompting Vernon to turn and lash out blindly at Harry. The hook at the end of the poker had caught the boy on the neck, causing a deep gash on the. Dudley screamed at the sight of the blood and this brought Petunia downstairs. She spotted the boy and started screaming at Vernon, not even trying to check on the bleeding child. They had continued to scream at each other until Dumbledore burst through the front door. Dumbledore heard the sound of approaching sirens and withdrew his wand. A few quick charms that forced the Dursleys to tell the truth of what happened without revealing the magical world, and then he apparated away. Flashback end that had been nearly 2 weeks ago. The Muggle Aurors, the police, hadn't released the body for several days after the death, and then there had been the questioning of the Potters when they had arrived to collect it. The police believed James's claim that he and Lily traveled for business so much and had left Harry with Petunia so he could have some level of stability. The grave diggers had just finished filling in the grave when Dumbledore approached the Potters. He offered his condolences and told them if they needed anything to just ask. They thanked him for his words and left by car. Jennifer being too young to be EPO said to magical travel. Dumbledore approached the gravestone. "Oh Harry, how I failed you." I'm sorry," Dumbledore said with a stricken voice. He did not bother with any spells to repel the rain, nor with an umbrella to shield him from the never-ending downpour. Rather, he let the cold water soak through his long hair and beard. His outlandish violet robes with the moving moon and stars dulled and became still. Dumbledore stood there for several minutes reflecting on the innocence he had failed in his life, before he too left that little cemetery in Godric's Hollow. What he, and everyone else failed to notice was the 8-year-old boy, wearing old and overly large clothing, watching from afar. a boy with a nasty mark across his neck. It was raining, as though the heavens themselves wept for the poor, innocent child being buried. At least that's what he felt. The day had started out bright, but then a powerful storm had begun to build, and now the rain lashed down all around those in the little graveyard. It was fitting how the day's weather matched the boy's life. Pathetic fallacy, it was called, the act of assigning human traits or emotions to inanimate objects or acts of nature. The holy man was in the middle of reciting the prayers for the dead. How had this come about? This couldn't have been his doing. The old fool wouldn't grant him such freedom. Not after what he'd done, this time. But as he scanned the sky for any sign of attack, there was nothing. Why? That was the question. And the answer was linked in some way to the events of that night 7 years ago. He focused, calling what little memory of the night he possessed to the front of his mind. It was the 31st of October 1981. The night was cold, if dry. The sounds of laughter drifted into the cottage from the village. The laughter of children in dress, asking at houses for gifts of sweets or money. Inside the cottage there were 4 people. James and his beautiful wife Lily, as well as their twin sons, Harry and Darren. Both had inherited most of their father's features, although they had their mother's eyes. The children played in the sitting room with their father, crawling over each other and him. More interested in the sights, sounds and smells than any coherent game. Lily came in from the kitchen and scooped up Darren before turning to her husband and speaking. Her words are mostly lost on the children, but they do understand one. Bed. James lifts up Harry and follows Lily up to the nursery. The children cry, not wanting to stop playing with their father. James laughs and leaves. Just as the children begin to sleep, a loud bang sounded and the house shook. James's voice cries out, panic laced through it. The panic is soon replaced with rage as he and another shout at each other. There's a thud and then silence. A figure dressed all in black enters the nursery. He points a short stick at Lily and speaks. His voice is low, cold and twisted. Lily stands between him and the children. He motions with the stick and speaks again. Once more she refuses. The man snarls and fires a red light from the stick. Lily just collapses. He steps over her and studies the boys. Whatever he searches for eludes him. He levels his stick at Darren, the closer, and speaks. Green light rushes at the younger twin. Harry watches and hopes his brother will be fine, but some part of his mind knows he won't and acts. Accidental magic occurs when the subconsciousness taps into the power within a wizard or witch and uses it, without the brain even being aware. This means effects not normally available can occur. Like here, where Harry drained most of his magic and another magic that had lurked deeper within himself to shield his brother from harm. As his vision faded, Harry saw an arc of green light, darker than the man's light, launch itself towards Darren and collide with as the man's light did. Flashback end movement catches his eye, snapping him back to reality. Lily adjusts the bundle in her arms. She looks like death on a bad day. He works out what he learned from the memories. The boy, Darren, he was why Harry had no magic. He was why Harry was sent away to that family instead of staying with his own. What was the reason the old man gave? Dumbledore had just finished running his emanation spells over Harry and was studying the results. The last one had stung a bit, so Lily told him he could have ice cream, but only if he shared it with Darren. Harry rushed towards the kitchen and told Darren they could have ice cream. Harry then turned and started back towards the sitting room. "Where are you going?" Darren asked. "Mummy says we should ask others if they want sweets too," he said. Harry turned around and returned to ask if they wanted any. When he got to the door, he heard talking. James had told him it was impolite to interrupt others when they were talking, so he decided to wait a minute before asking. His magical levels are too low to safely travel by port key or flow, Dumbledore said. To even try could cause serious damage to him. It's the same reason children under a certain age shouldn't be transported using them. Well, Padfoot or Moony would be glad to look after him, James spoke up. I feel that leaving Harry in a less magical environment would be better, that way wards to block the owls delivering the threats won't interfere with his guardian's daily life. It would also help him in the long term to see people coping without magic or able to lead happy lives. Dumbledore replied. I guess we could ask Petunia. That was all of his mother's reply that he heard. He ran up the stairs and into his room. There he cried. He cried for a long time. A week later his mother was dropping him off with his aunt and uncle, who lived in Surrey. That was the last time she would see her firstborn son alive. Flashback end. What followed was a montage of bitter memories. The boy was mocked, subtlety. His aunt was the best. A slight whisper as he passed, about how he was a freak and even then was useless among them. How his parents had left him here never to return. Of how he was lucky she and her husband had taken pity on him or he would have ended up dead. Her husband and son were worse. They just insulted him openly. He was weak, he was ugly, he was worthless. He was small. Dudley would even hit him if he could avoid being seen by his mother. Vernon didn't care either way. All the while, no contact from his parents or his friends. That was how things continued until that day nearly 2 weeks ago. Harry had snapped and struck back at Dudley. Why there? Why like that? He wondered aloud. You must have known I'd heard worse insults in my youth. Was it an attempt to kill me once and for all? Then why not do it then and there? Why bother banishing me? You never seemed to care if anyone saw you act like a heartless bastard. Was the information he needed buried there, in the wording of his banishment? The chains chafed. The collar around his neck, which was chained to the floor, made it difficult to turn his head and study the gathered crowd. Still he did. He wanted to see what she was doing. Sigyn, she had stood by him through every horrible thing he did. She had begged for mercy on his behalf after learning his drunken actions had cost their sons their lives. He spotted her, just behind him and to his right. Like many gathered, she looked unhappy. That was different. She was always supportive, regardless of the wickedness of his actions. He looked closer and saw it wasn't anger but sadness that marred her beautiful face. The doors to the throne room opened and Odin entered. Now there was a man he despised. That bastard who dared to have a look of disappointment on his face now. Yeah, be disappointed. I didn't learn anything from your last punishment and I won't learn anything from this one. Just give me what I want and I'll never bother you again, he muttered under his breath. Loki. The All-Father boomed. This time you have gone too far. I have tried many times to force the lesson that your actions are not free of consequences, yet you simply refuse to learn. It is with a heavy heart that I am forced to take this action. At these words the doors reopened and a pair of guards entered, flanking Hel. Loki bolted upright, or as upright as he could get with all the chains. Your punishment, while harsh, will hopefully teach you what you need to know. No, he wouldn't. Would he? Loki watched as Odin approached his daughter, his youngest remaining child. As Loki prepared to threaten the king of Asgard, the man spoke again. You shall be sent to Midgard. Your memories bound. You shall live as a mortal, learn like they do. Actions have consequences, do it. Hel looked to her father, avoided his eyes and used her power over life and death. It took Loki a second to understand what was being done. He didn't even have time to scream. Flashback end. Loki watched as the Potters walked away. He watched as the old man stood in front of the grave and apologized for failing the boy. He watched as the old man left. None had noticed him. Good, his magic was working. It wouldn't do to be spotted. Not as he appeared now, not as an 8-year-old boy, wearing old and overly large clothing. A boy with a nasty-looking gash across his neck. Loki approached the grave. It felt wrong to deceive people like this, but he couldn't afford to attract unwanted attention. Besides, the boy was dead. He died the second Loki regained his memories. All that remained of little Harry Potter were memories and a few stray feelings floating around in Loki's head. You died so that I would once again exist, he whispered to the tombstone. For that I thank you. With that, Loki turned and walked away from the empty grave. Loki wandered along a busy street. He had never seen so many mortals in one place, nor had he seen any with skin so dark or eyes like some possessed. And their clothing, so strange and eotic. Loki couldn't help but smile. Mortals sure have changed. Loki mused as a couple passed him dressed in leather and ripped denim, their hair wild colors and styled into spikes. Loki wandered into the restroom of a restaurant and stared at his reflection. He was surprised at how similar his current face, Harry's, matched the structure of his regular one. Even if the eyes and hair were the wrong color or the chin too rounded. Ensuring his glamour was still in place, he set about correcting his appearance. First the hair lightened to a deep red, then slowly darkened to the same shade as dried blood, almost brownish. His eyes followed net, changing to a much darker shade of green. Loki stripped of the jumper and started restoring his scars. Loki was proud of his scars, like any born and raised in either Jotunheimer or Asgard. First came the small scratch-like marks from sparring with Odin or battling Jotun, followed by the jagged marks Angerboda left across his back the first time they made love. Finally came his most distinctive scars. Loki raised the end finger of each hand to the edge of his lips and slowly traced a wicked grin across his cheeks. The hideous scars, which mortals called a Glasgow smile, formed as his fingers traveled across his face. Sigyn loved these scars and would spend hours just tracing them as they lay in bed together. Loki looked at the gash on the left-hand side of his neck. It was bad and the stasis he had it under wouldn't last forever. Loki cursed never learning any healing magic and settled on dealing with it the only way he knew how. Loki began to rub his hands together and generated heat. Psyching himself up, Loki slapped his right hand to his neck and bid down a scream as the skin was cauterized and then sealed shut by the heat. Loki retrieved his jumper and set out into the street again. After a few minutes of walking aimlessly, Loki heard a strange sound. It was music, but not like anything he had heard before. Loki entered the shop it came from. "Now did you read the news today? They say the danger's gone away. But I can see the fires still alight, they're burning into the night." Loki stood and listened to the music. The lyrics caught his attention. "This is a land of confusion," he repeated. "Ha ha ha, I like it. Men of power, losing control by the hour. If this is what the mortals believe, then I can see you Thor liked them so much." He listened to the entire song before mining the posters on the walls. Loki decided to stay in the store for a while. He watched people come and go, searching their minds to learn about the strange new world which had sprung up over the last 1,500 years. He couldn't believe it. Entire landmasses he had never heard of, cultures beyond his imagining and around Earth. That one really messed with his understanding of the world. "It's a whole new world, isn't it?" He laughed as he set off. He had some sightseeing to do. Loki stopped when he spotted a familiar-looking bird. He smiled and wrapped himself in a stronger glamour before sneaking up on the feathered fool. When he was close enough he lunged forward and caught the raven. Odin sat on his throne, wondering what had happened. The wards he infused into the bindings on Loki's soul to alert him when his brother would be returning had sounded. But it was more than a century too early for that. Even worse was that Loki hadn't returned yet. If he was free then he would have come straight back to Asgard. Something was wrong. He had asked Heimdall to observe all of Midgard and had dispatched his ravens, Hugin and Munin, to search for him. He had visited Valhalla in the vain hope that Loki died in battle and ended up there. No such luck. Loki would be 8 years old and not worth the notice of the Valkyrie. He was considering traveling to Niflheim when Munin returned, looking rather manhandled. "All father, I bring news," Munin cawed. The scar lip lives. "He is trapped in the child's body and is rather annoyed at this. His words, my lord, not mine. Piss poor, attempt to get rid of him. He also demanded that I call you Milk Maiden, while reporting on his feelings." "Where is he?" Odin demanded, rising from his throne and rushing towards the stables. Odin planned to collect Sleipnir, ride out to wherever Loki was and drag him home. He'd then deliver an unforgettable beating to his brother for making him worry and lock him away somewhere as punishment. Somewhere with Sigyn, a bed and plenty of fine food. "He awaits you outside of a large mortal settlement, called Cardiff," Munin replied. "I am to guide you there after delivering a message to Lady Sigyn. I shall meet you at the Bifrost, my lord." With that the raven flew off to Loki's quarters. Milk Maiden. "Oh, You'll pay for that one, Loki. Odin grumbled as he collected Sleipnir's saddle and prepared to ride. Come on, we're off to find that fool the mother of yours, he told the eight-legged stallion. The stallion neighed in reply. Sleipnir trotted along the country road at a brisk pace. He wanted to see his mother and find out what he'd done this time to warrant banishment. Fenris had been asking, and Sleipnir didn't like not being able to answer his younger brother's questions. He picked up speed when he detected magic in the net field and set off into a gallop, nearly dismounting his rider. Hello, son, Loki called. And drop dead to you, milk maiden, he added after Odin grunted. Sleipnir stared at his mother, noting how small he'd gotten as well as the nasty scar on his neck. Loki, what happened? Odin asked as he dismounted. How did the binding release so soon, and what did you mean a piss-poor attempt to get rid of you? The mortals I was reborn to left me with their kin, who turned out to be less than kind. Loki growled, showing his teeth for a moment. Harry, the boy I was, defended himself and was struck by a fire poker. That's how I got the new scar, by the way. As to the getting rid of me thing, that has always been your way of punishing me. Banishment or imprisonment to keep me out of the way. This attempt ed worse than your other attempts. Well, I can't have you killed like many call for, can I? Odin snapped back. And stop calling me Milk Maiden. Odin despised that nickname, only Loki dared to use it anymore and showed no sign of stopping. Right, well, let's go. Go? Where? Loki asked, confusion clearly etched onto his face. Home. Where else? Odin called as he mounted Sleipnir and prepared to travel across the Bifrost. Hold it, Odin. Loki called. I can't leave yet. I mean, you said it yourself, actions have consequences. I have to live like a mortal and learn like they do. I'll be back in about a century or two. Oh, and about that thing I want. No, Odin interrupted. For the last time, no, I'm sorry, brother, but I cannot, will not do as you ask. Fine. Farewell, all father. I'll speak with you again soon, Sleipnir. Loki replied stiffly before disappearing. I'm sorry, Loki, but what you ask would mean the end of Asgard. Our people's continued existence are more important than your happiness, or mine. Odin whispered. He stared at the spot Loki occupied a moment ago before setting out for Asgard. Loki watched the night sky above him. The stars seemed different to how he remembered them. It made sense, really, from what he'd learned. The sky wasn't solid. Every star was actually a sun somewhere out in a vast void which surrounded Midgard. The fact that Midgard, or Earth as the mortals called it, was round surprised him as well. How had no one ever worked this out before? This train of thought gave Loki an idea of what to do, but first he wanted to check on something else. Loki trudged through the thick snow, his small body struggling to part the heavy powder. Ymir's frozen ball sack, Loki acclaimed as a powerful gust of wind knocked him over. As he rose to his feet, Loki decided enough was enough. Skin stretched, bones lengthened, and clothing was morphed by magic. Gone was the small frame of a mortal, Aesir child, and in its place stood the heavy frame of a Jotun child. The difference being a good 13 inches in height and about 3 stone. Loki set off, faring somewhat better. It took Loki almost 2 weeks to finally come to a shocking conclusion. They were gone. Jotunheimer was devoid of any actual Jotun. How? It didn't make sense. Where could they have gone? He'd found ruins and remains scattered around the place, but not enough to indicate extinction. It was another question he would need answered. And he knew of only one that could, and would, answer. His third son, Jormungand. The Midgard serpent. Loki spent nearly a month searching for any sign of his son. It seemed that Jormungand had all but retreated from the world of man. Loki eventually got lucky while searching the eastern coasts of America, a region where many vessels had disappeared over the years. And so Loki found himself on a small fishing boat several miles of the coast of Florida with nearly 36 dead cows to use as bait. Better be here, Loki muttered. I need answers and you may have them. Loki proceeded to slit the stomachs of the cows and dumped them over the side of the ship. What followed was a feeding frenzy by the local marine creatures, who Loki harpooned to use as even more bait. It took almost 2 days before Loki sensed his child approach. Loki grinned as he prepared to greet Jormungand, only for that grin to slip from his face when he realized that Jormungand would most likely just eat the bait and ship before lowering his head again. Thankfully Jormungand had sensed his father's presence on the ship and surfaced nearby. Like his older brothers, Sleipnir and Fenris, Jormungand could not speak the languages of man. Made sense really with him being a massive snake and all. Loki, however, was gifted with the ability to understand most creatures, and so communication with his oldest children never was much of a problem. Jormungand, you've grown. Loki called out. Only Jormungand's head had surfaced and he still could have swallowed the bait, the boat and 100 more boats like it at once. It was only his skill at casting illusions that stopped mortals from spotting him. Listen, I have some questions and was hoping you could answer them for me. A rather long and angry hiss was the reply. Okay. You're right. That was rude of me, so how have you been? Hiss whoa. Sorry I asked HISSSSS. Now listen here, young man. Don't you take that tone with me. HISSSSSSSS. Now that is enough. I am your father and you will show me the respect I deserve. Jormungand responded to this by sticking his tongue out and blowing a raspberry. Something normally impossible to do without lips, but he succeeded. Loki glared at him and slowly let his face become twisted with rage. Jormungand suddenly decided that provoking his father may not have been the best course of action. As he prepared to dive and flee, Loki's lip twitched. Suddenly Loki collapsed with laughter. All right. Now I do need some information and you are the only one I can trust to know what happened. Loki called out between fits of laughter. As Loki prepared to ask his first question, the smile faded from his face. I've just come from Jotunheimer. Jormungand had e-planed everything. At some point between Loki being unchained from the rock and being sent to Midgard, the Jotnar had gone to with themselves. This had happened before. The Frosts would fight the mountains for resources or out of boredom. But this time Surtur and the Fire had gotten involved and had dragged all the smaller tribes, the ones who usually provided mates to the larger tribes for repopulation, into the fighting. So when the fighting stopped, there wasn't enough able-bodied Jotnar to repopulate, and so fighting had started all over again to control the young and breed able. This in turn pushed the already low population to unsustainable levels. The few survivors tried to restart the race, but with such a small gene pool, inbreeding soon took its toll on their descendants. The giants, neither Jormungand or Loki feeling the current race deserved to be called Jotnar, had left Jotunheimer and settled in Central Europe, where they continued to inbreed. The race had degraded from the deceptively advanced, if brutish, Jotun into which Loki had been born to an almost feral gathering of beings no better than trolls. Loki felt ill, while he had little love for his kind. He felt the Jotnar had abandoned him before he had been found by Bor and taken in by him. That had been why he had aided Odin and the other Aesir during the wars with the Jotnar. The fate that had befallen his kin was still severe. After learning what had become of the Jotnar, Loki asked general questions about the world and those who dwelled within it. After thanking Jormungand and giving his word that should he ever encounter a creature called the Leviathan, a giant whale-like beast that lived in the Mediterranean Sea, that he would capture if for Jormungand to eat, Loki was on his way. Seems the beast had attempted to eat Jormungand when he had been younger and now hid in the Mediterranean, so Jormungand couldn't return the favor. Loki absent-mindedly wondered how Thor would react to learning that Jormungand didn't consider him to be his nemesis. The fit he imagined Thor throwing brought tears of laughter to Loki's eyes. Loki spent the next few months learning as much about the mortal world as he could. He was also planning out his world tour, marking places he wanted to see and things he wanted to do. The main problem he faced was that his body couldn't handle the sheer level of power Loki could normally generate. He'd already said about flying that, but it would take time. What Loki needed was a vessel. Something to pilot around while he strengthened his mortal body. It would need to be something that wouldn't make traveling difficult, was used to magical energy, so that he didn't burn it out, and that would shield his body within itself. It was for this reason that Loki was wandering around a magical area, under a powerful glamour, hoping to be struck by inspiration. And struck he was, literally. Some idiot smacked him in the back of the head with the handle of a broom as he passed. When Loki turned to see what had hit him, he spotted a rather suspicious man following a rather ugly witch with a hairy chin. A quick peek into the man's mind and Loki knew he'd found the perfect vessel. This guy was magical. If weak, had no relations, that would miss him anyway, and was old enough that Loki wouldn't be turned away from anywhere he wanted to enter. Loki rattled his brain trying to remember the spell needed for possession as he trailed along behind the man. When the man followed the witch into an alley, Loki acted. Gathering magic around himself, he rushed forward and dove into the man's back, sinking in and fusing himself to the man's essence. There was a brief struggle before Loki sealed the man's mind away in a powerful dreamlike state. Loki dusted off his new body, adjusted his robes and set off into the night, ready for a life of adventure, experiences and mayhem, all with a small smirk on his lips. Loki's first action was, after absorbing the man's memories, was the blocking off of several of them. The second was to clear out all the fool's hair care products. Now Loki was vain, and he'd admitted himself, but the level of effort this guy put into his appearance was unnatural for a straight man in his opinion. Loki raided the man's closet to find something tasteful, but practical. He found several articles of clothing that fell into the first category but none that qualified for the second one. Right, first thing tomorrow I'll need some new clothes. Loki thought aloud as he checked the fridge for anything nice to eat. Then I'll head to the bank and clear out the vault. Gonna need some spending money while I'm overseas. Loki fied himself a rather large sandwich. Really, it was a loaf of bread split in two and between each section a bit of everything edible in the kitchen, and set about penning a few simple letters. The first was to some small publishing house. His vessel was a budding, red pathetic writer and had been trying to get them to publish his book, which ed worse than anything Loki could remember reading. The second was to the bank, stating he'd be in tomorrow morning to empty his vault as he was traveling and needed his savings, as little as they were. The third was to the landlord, telling her he was leaving early and she could keep everything he didn't take with him. With those sent off using the man's owl, who'd given him a confused look for a moment, Loki threw himself onto the man's bed and fell fast asleep. The next morning saw Loki up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, figuratively speaking. Loki had long ago vowed to avoid any form that had a tail, since the last time he had one he ended up giving birth to a colt. This interestingly meant Loki was one of the few men, if possibly the only man, able to answer the question of which hurt more, childbirth or being kicked in the balls. Loki's answer was always childbirth. Not only did it hurt more, it also tended to last much longer. Anyway, Loki set off nice and early to get some new clothes. He chose to shop in a Muggle store because he liked their styles more than the dresses wizards tended to favor. 1 hour and several stores later saw Loki dressed in a comfortable pair of slacks, a neat dress shirt and stylish dress shoes. Over this he wore a wizard's traveling cloak, as not to offend delicate, pure bloods who tended to have panic attacks when faced with something Muggle, even something as simple as clothing. It was 11:15 when Loki walked into Gringotts for the first time. It took him less than 3 seconds to decide he wouldn't be returning for a long time if he could help it. Everywhere he looked he saw dwarves and it sickened him. Loki had never liked the little bastards, even before a few of them had sewn his mouth shut. Loki struggled to control his desire to go on a killing spree and joined the shortest queue. After 15 minutes of standing in line, Loki was finally called to a counter staffed by one of the fattest dwarves, or goblins as they tended to call themselves these days, Loki had ever saw. "What?" snapped the goblin. "I've come to empty my vault. It is number 4479 and here is my key." Loki informed the little prick in what he hoped was a civil tone. It wouldn't do to piss off the crazy little bastard and be left without any money. "Fine. Snapclaw, take the human to his vault so it can be emptied." The goblin barked at one of the lower-ranked employees. Loki followed behind quietly, mostly to avoid opening his mouth and insulting the prick. One wild cart ride later and Loki was standing outside Vault 4479 and staring at the measly pile of gold and silver coins contained within it. "Well, nuggets," Loki swore. So much for his grand tour of the world, all epenses paid by the fool he'd possessed. His choice of words earned him a strange look from the goblin with him. Loki started to think of ways he could earn more money when it came to him. The fool's crappy books. They ed because they contained nothing but pathetic bullshit. Loki, on the other hand, was the lie smith. All his bullshit smelled like roses bathed in perfume. He also had the power to back up any claims he made in the books, and it could act as a way of chronicling his adventures. Besides, Loki had plenty of little nuggets of wit and wisdom floating around in his head, just waiting to be dispensed. Loki collected all but one of the silver coins, sickles if he recalled correctly, and set out into the world with a mad, partly formed plan in mind. Time skip. 1.5 years. Loki looked up from the latest draft of his netbook. It would be the third one to be published and detailed his adventures in the South American rainforests. He'd edited all the stories down to make them suitable for younger readers while staying as faithful to the truth as he could. An owl had landed on the table in front of him carrying the paper. Loki paid the bird and scanned the front page. Two things caught his attention. Firstly, the date. "Oh, seems I turned 11 yesterday." Loki directed this statement to the teapot. "I'll get something nice in Milan later as a gift to myself. Maybe I should go and say a few words at the grave." The second thing to catch his eye was the main story. Gringotts break-in. It has been confirmed that vault number 713 had been breached by an unknown thief or thieves. So far nothing has been reported stolen, nor has the name of the vault holder. Seems someone actually had the balls to try robbing the dwarves. This statement went to the sugarpot. "Gutsy son of a. Doubt he or she'll keep said guts for long if the wankers have anything to say about it." After finishing off his breakfast, Loki showered and dressed in his finest robes before departing for the little ceremony involved in welcoming him into the Dark Force Defense League, even if it only was as an honorary member. After being sworn in as an honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, Loki set off once again into the world. He tended to track the rumors relating to certain dangerous creatures or individuals. One such individual was Fenrir Greyback. Greyback was one of the mortals Loki had sworn to personally deliver to Hell. No way that monster was going to continue walking the earth free if he could help it. Loki had made this vow when we stumbled onto the scene an attack Greyback committed. Flashback: Loki had left Britain a few weeks ago and was enjoying the scenery in rural France. It was early and Loki was trekking through a small park when he noticed a large gathering just off the track. Curious, Loki approached in time to see several wizards appear and start modifying memories of the local police. "Oi!" he called to one of the officially dressed wizards. "What's going on here?" The man jumped and turned, drawing his wand as he did so, preparing to erase the memory from whatever muggle had stumbled onto them. Loki saw this and reacted faster. "Epeliarmus," Loki declared, drawing his own wand. He smirked as the started man's wand flew out of his hand towards Loki. Casting the spell attracted the attention of the other wizards, who all turned to face Loki. Realizing he was outnumbered and that there would be witnesses unless he killed police as well, Loki raised his hands and signaled his surrender. "You are under arrest." "Now who are you? Why did you attack my officer?" one of the rather angry wizards barked at Loki after they had taken his wand and bound his hands. It seemed Loki had run into the French version of the Obliviators while they were modifying the scene of a brutal werewolf attack. "Gilderoy Lockhart." Loki lied. "And I defended myself. That man was about to attempt to tamper with my memories." It took nearly an hour for the whole matter to be cleared up and Loki released. During that time, Loki had asked about the crime scene they had altered. It seemed a werewolf who called himself Fenrir, after the legendary wolf, had taken offense to the actions of a local witch. So he'd kidnapped her children on the night of the full moon and savaged them after turning. The crime scene had contained the remains of 3 small children. Loki returned to the scene and watched under a glamour as the gore was cleared away. The human remains had been replaced with animal pieces. leading the investigators to believe some youths may be practicing Satanism in the area. Now Loki had fathered 5 children in his time, 4 of whom were still alive. So to see this done to a child made him ill. The knowledge that the oldest had been barely 13 and the youngest not even toilet trained just made it worse. Loki searched the surrounding area for the bastard's trail and set off in pursuit. Loki wasn't sure what he'd do when he caught the werewolf, but he knew it would go down in history as one of the most gruesome cases of torture ever committed on a human being. Loki tracked Greyback to a small dilapidated shack. Judging from the scents and noises coming from inside, there was an entire pack of them. Loki recalled being told how Greyback and those that followed him actively targeted children, which made them all acceptable targets in his eyes. Loki glanced at the sky and began to calculate the time by the sun's position. The werewolves would still be recovering from last night's transformation and so would be vulnerable to attack about now. Loki spent the next hour or so circling the shack, laying traps for any who would try and escape. Flashback end: the attack had been a success, mostly. Greyback and maybe 3 of his followers had escaped, but not uninjured. The rest of his pack perished when Loki raided the shack or set fire to it afterwards. The event made national news and catapulted Loki, or Lockhart as everyone thought, into the limelight. Loki had been interviewed by newspapers and Aurors to find out why he'd done it. The answer was always the same. That a beast like him exists, it's wrong. I'll never stop hunting him or those like him. I'll find them all, it may not be tomorrow or even next year, but I'll find them. And when I do, no power on this earth will protect them from me. At first his statement was taken to refer to werewolves in general, and Loki found himself being approached by several bigoted purebloods offering to help him get rid of the beasts. This prompted Loki to give a second interview clarifying that he had nothing against werewolves and was referring to Greyback's habit of attacking children. That cost Loki his wealthy new friends. Of course, the entire statement angered the Aurors, who saw him as a vigilante and warned him that if he continued they would arrest him. Loki's reply was simply, "You can try." And Loki did chase him. Across 3 countries and from one safe house to another. In months Loki had succeeded in crippling Greyback's pack and breaking the fear and power the werewolf had amassed over the years. This had caused the Greyback to go to ground, leaving Loki with no way of finding him. Of course, this wasn't all Loki had done. He'd taken detours to help the helpless and all that hero stuff. He'd also taken the time to loot anything not nailed down, and that was out of sight. This gave him a rather nice bank balance that he could access later. He'd even managed to get his hands on Gram, the sword of Sigurd. It had been in the possession of a rather weak, dark witch from Copenhagen and was something he was looking forward to using on everyone he could. Until he had a chance to use it, however, it was being stored in Vault 4479. It had, however, brought a rather major flaw in his plan to Loki's attention. When he was done with the body, how would he access the money? The answer came to him one dull morning while he read up on some of the mortal wars. A particular tactic used by the British during the last massive war they'd fought had been to make fake tanks out of cardboard and inflated sacks to trick enemy spies into thinking they had more firepower than they actually did. Eureka! He'd acclaimed aloud. I'll trick them into thinking there is someone helping me. A few illusions here, a reference to him there, and I'll have a backstory for when I'm done with this useless fool. Of course, the exclamation had gotten him kicked out of the library he'd been reading in. Loki also made money legally. He'd started writing, lying in the written word instead of the spoken one. He used the events of his travels as the basis of his stories, but edited the events so the stories would appeal to the children of today. And avoid implicating him in several major thefts. It seemed that describing how he'd tortured the location of a Muggle sacrificing cult out of a member was considered unsuitable for kids these days. Several stories would be published every months in collections of short stories, authored by Gilderoy Lockhart. He would hopefully have his South American rainforest adventures on shelves by Yule, when people bought gifts for each other, and his works would sell nicely. He was also working on a separate book, a guide to magical combat and surviving against the different creatures he knew about. That would be penned by Gilderoy's young apprentice, a rather powerful but shy young wizard by the name of Loch Lysmith. Loki was rather proud of the name he'd given his future alias. Loch, just being the Danish version of Loki, and Lysmith was his official title, Loki Lys-Smith. Simple but effective. Loki had even faked several documents to further cement his background. He even appeared to have his apprentice help in several of his heroic deeds, though a mature of illusions and compulsions cast of witnesses to make them believe so. The appearance was basically his mortal form aged up about 7 years. Loki had only seen his brother once since that day in Wales, but it had ended on a much happier, not to mention drunker, note. Flashback: Loki was in a clearing in the Black Forest playing around with Graham, getting used to the weight and checking the balance of the blade when he spotted a familiar-looking bird. He smiled and wrapped himself in a strong glamour before sneaking up on the feathered fool. When he was close enough, he lunged forward and caught the raven, again. Odin was on his throne awaiting the return of Hugin and Munin from their daily trip to Midgard when Munin flew into the throne room looking rather manhandled. "All Father, I bring news," Munin cawed. "The Scarlip has information regarding the Ragnarok. He says to come as soon as you can. It is vital you hear this." "Where is he?" Odin asked, trying to contain his excitement. If Loki truly had news on the final battle, it could help avert the destruction of Asgard. Getting information on it was difficult, with the Norn refusing to speak any more than, "The Aesir will die along with the Vanir. The Fenris wolf shall devour Odin. The Midgard serpent shall fall to Thor. Hel shall release her armies against the denizens of Valhalla. None shall survive." If Loki had found more information, it would be great. Odin smiled as he rose from his throne and rushed towards the stables. Sleipnir would get him to Loki in no time at all. "Munin." Odin called out to the raven. "Where is he this time?" Sleipnir trotted along through the forest searching for any sign of his mother. He'd been sad that their last meeting had ended so soon, but understood why Loki had left in a bad mood. But this time it was important. Information on the Ragnarok would take time to explain, meaning more time for Sleipnir to spend with his mother. As he neared a clearing, he detected magic and quickened his pace. In the clearing was a weak-chinned and weedy-looking man with messy blonde hair sitting against a tree, book in hand and sword resting across his lap. The man looked up and gave a large smile, while displaying none of his teeth. Sleipnir sniffed the air and caught the scent of his mother's magic coming from the man. "Loki," Odin called. "Yep," the man replied. "What do you think? Better than a scarred child at any rate." "Is that? Are you possessing a mortal?" "Why?" Odin asked, dumbfounded. "Long story. Maybe I'll tell you one day. Anyway, I've got great news," Loki answered, the look on his face indicating that the story would be very interesting. "I may be the last intelligent and healthy giant in Iceland." "What? How? What?" Odin asked, unable to fully understand what he'd just heard. "A civil war. Well, 2 of them really, all but wiped out the Jotnar. The survivors fled to Midgard and interbred for generations. They'll be gone within 2 centuries at best," Loki told him, as he opened a small satchel that lay on the ground beside him. "Oh, and get this. Their total numbers come to less than 100. We used to kill those kind of numbers as kids, remember?" At this point, Loki had removed a small banquet from the satchel and set it out around himself on the ground. He'd also set a large bucket of water and a pile of sugar cubes to his right-hand side, which Sleipnir consumed with glee. "Come on, let's celebrate." "But, the Norn. They said it was unavoidable," Odin explained. "That no matter what we did, we'd fall to the Jotnar. How could they have wiped themselves out beforehand?" "That's the thing." Loki laughed as he threw the book he had with him at Odin. "Here. It's a book about something the mortals' Norse mythology. It has us mentioned in it, everywhere. Kinda creepy actually. But Ragnarok is in there, and I think I know why it hasn't happened." "What? How?" Odin demanded desperately. "You," Loki said simply. "You heard Sigurd's plea for mercy and granted it, cutting me down off that rock. That didn't happen in the myth recorded there. I was left on that rock to suffer for a long time before I escaped and caused the battle. Odin just stared at his brother after hearing his confession. No, Loki was a troublemaker and loved nothing more than causing mayhem, but he wouldn't cause something like that. Odin opened the book and read, grateful that through Hugin and Munin he'd learned the modern languages. It was all there. The feast. Loki insulting everyone. How the other guests reacted. Everything up until he'd ordered Loki cut down, which had occurred the moment Sigyn had found him the following day after he'd sobered up. That hadn't happened here. Sigyn had instead tried to collect the poison in a bowl. "It's getting cold, Loki. Make me a fire so I can warm my old bones," Odin said, not even looking up from the book. He heard a soft incendio, and suddenly found a roaring fire beside him. "New spell?" he asked, again not looking up. "Yeah. Mortal magic has advanced," Loki told him. "Nowhere near as powerful as ours, but a lot more versatile. Look, Odin." "This tale," Odin interrupted, holding the book up as he spoke, "is never to be revealed to anyone. Is that understood?" With that, Odin cast the book into the fire. "We got lucky. The giants decided to kill themselves. We don't know why and have no intention of looking a gift horse in the mouth, all right?" Loki stared at Odin, trying to understand why. This was the man who had destroyed Loki's happiness by banishing 3 of his children out of fear of what might happen. This was the man who had drunkenly ordered the death of one of his sons by the other, who had then killed himself out of grief, because he didn't like what Loki said about him. As much as Loki loved his foster brother and wanted to believe that it was because of their bond that Odin would do this, all the pain the man had caused him just came rushing to the surface. Then he looked into Odin's remaining eye and saw it. All the worry, the sorrow and self-loathing that was there. "You should have been king, Loki," Odin said, averting his gaze. "Father loved you like his own blood and you were older, smarter. You would have been better suited to dealing with the other warlords. You should have taken the throne instead of me, but many still feared your heritage and so the task fell to me. I had to make the hard decisions, not based on what I want but what was best for our people. I wonder, had I never heard the prophecy, never tried to prevent Ragnarok, would our lives have been better? Would it even have occurred? Your sons wouldn't have hated us enough to attack. Hel would never have been in a position to raise an army from those sent to Niflheim in retaliation for me sending her there. Haha, by trying to stop it I ruined your life, their lives, and could have very well killed us all. You did what you thought was right for your subjects," Loki told him. "As much as I hate it, I know deep within my heart I would have acted the same had I been ruler. But, now that you know the battle will never take place, you think maybe you could let my children go?" Loki finished with a smile. "Haha, maybe. When you finally return home I'll hold a big feast and order they be brought home as well." Odin chuckled. "Now, you set out this feast for us to share, so let's eat and drink." Loki awoke to find himself lying face down on the tiled floor of the room he'd rented in the leaky cauldron. He didn't recall how he ended up there and was deeply upset by that. "On the rare occasion I actually get drunk, wild things tend to happen," he told the toilet as he rose to his feet. "Wonder what I did this time." Shaking himself, Loki set about drawing a bath for himself as he searched his room for clean clothes to wear. Today was the launch of his 5th collection of short stories and he'd foolishly agreed to do a book signing. On the upside, he'd get a chance to meet and observe some of his future students if they came into the store during the event. On the downside, he'd have to sit through several hours of dealing with his fanatics. "Give me the rock and snake any day." Loki shuddered. A quick check of the time revealed that he had about an hour to bathe, dress, eat and get to the bookstore in time. "Great, I gotta rush to make it. And they do such lovely food here." Loki made it with a whole 15 seconds to spare. While the teller opened the store he discussed with the manager about the small prizes he intended to award certain customers over the course of the day, for things like being the nth person to enter the store or the 267th person to say a certain phrase along with others. Some of the prizes were books, which Loki would pay for, or money. Some however would be receiving special prizes. Loki spent most of the early morning mingling with the customers or helping the teller serve them. He played it up for the crowd and got men to laugh and women to become flustered with the tales he spun and witty quips he came up with. He'd even had a long and interesting conversation with the head of the Aurors, Rufus Scrimgeour. The man was very impressed with the guide Loki had published as Loch Borson, and wanted to see if both he and Lockhart could be convinced to teach a few classes to the Auror recruits. The job offer had been turned down as Locke was a very private person and Lockhart had just accepted a job offer that you occupy his time until next summer at the least. Although he did promise to send over detailed accounts of his adventures to be used as case studies, they'd contain all the gory details but lack the incriminating evidence of his partial kleptomania, statute of limitations and all that. After noon, Loki begged off long enough to enjoy a small, if well cooked, in his opinion, meal at the Leaky Cauldron before rushing back to sign books. All the while giving out gifts of books or money because, why not? However, as they say, all good things must come to an end. They also say that the eyes are the windows to the soul, and never did Loki believe this more than when he looked up from his hands, which had suddenly developed a strange pricking sensation around his thumbs. Loki's eyes met the man's for barely 1/10 of a second as he scanned the store, and in that instant Loki had seen everything. All the man's acts of cruelty, all his attacks on those he considered scum and beneath him while he had attended school. Many simply had the poor fortune to be born into a certain type of family. They were different in ideology and so became acceptable targets for his sadistic acts. Loki was also forced to bear witness to the atrocities committed during the last war, on both enemies and civilians. Random acts of torture and murder committed because they were different in belief, in origin. Loki forced down the bile that had risen up in his throat and forced a smile as he turned his attention to the 3-year-old girl who'd just told him his stories, were her favorite bedtime stories, and how she wanted to grow up and protect people like he did. That comment earned her one of the Etra sugary lollies. Loki kept in his pocket for when his blood sugar dropped. Loki continued to sign books and chat with customers until a low siren and flashing lights went off, indicating that someone had done something to warrant a prize. Loki set off to meet and congratulate the winner who, after a quick magical check, had won a voucher that meant Loki would pay for up to 12 books he or she purchased. The winner turned out to be a small, bushy-haired and somewhat panicking girl who was in the company of 2 adults that she bore a familial likeness to and the Potters. Doing his best to ignore James and Lily, Loki put on a soft smile and spoke up. "Well, what have we here? Another spot prize winner. Wonderful. Now what, pray tell, is your name?" "Hermione. Hermione Granger," she managed to squeak out, the panic fading and being replaced by the star-struck look Loki saw often enough. Loki laughed and, with a flick of his wrist, conjured her prize. "Well, here you go," he said as she took it, noticing the confused and slightly worried looks of her parents, as well as their muggle clothing. Loki introduced himself with a joking bow. "Gilderoy Lockhart, at your service. Now, Miss Granger, who might your companions be?" "Oh, these are my parents," she stammered. "Mr. and Mrs. Granger, it is a pleasure," Loki interrupted, turning up the charm. "And, these are the Potters," she continued. "Potters. Potters." Loki thought aloud. "Why is that name? Wait, as in Darren Potter, the famed boy who lived? Well, Ms. Granger, you travel in interesting circles, I see." Here Loki focused his attention on his new blood can. "Mr. and Mrs. Potter, how nice to meet you. Darren, I can't thank you enough for beating Voldemort." Loki noted how many of the wizards, witches around them flinched, as did Hermione. "And who might you be?" Loki asked the small child by Lily's side. "My name is Jenny, nice to meet you," the little girl said with a smile. "Well, it's very nice to meet you, Jenny. Tell me, do you like sweets?" Loki asked. "Yep," was the excited reply, complete with vigorous nodding. Loki made a show of searching his pockets before he pulled out a massive lolly, the kind even adults find difficult to fit into their mouths. "Here you go," Loki said as he handed it over. "Well, you certainly have changed, Lockhart." James spoke up, a small smile on his face. "You aren't nearly as much of an arrogant prick as you used to be." This statement got several soft gasps from those around them. Loki's response was to widen his smile, showing most of his teeth. Had Charlie Weasley, Hagrid or even Marge Dursley been present, they would have known it wasn't so much a smile as a case of when an angered animal bared its teeth. However, as they weren't, everyone assumed Loki had taken the comment as a joke and found it amusing. "Well, that truly most be my greatest achievement," Loki laughed, although everyone could detect the underlying edge. To be considered an arrogant prick by the likes of James Potter. Truly a feat no mere mortal could hope to obtain. This comeback prompted those that had gathered around them to laugh. One person who didn't like the comeback was James, who looked like he was about to reach for his wand. He might have had a voice cut through the crowd. Famous Darren Potter. Can't even go into a bookshop without drawing attention to himself. Loki turned towards the speaker and saw it was a child, around Darren, Hermione's age. Neat platinum blonde hair and an aristocratic face told Loki the boy was a Malfoy. Loki knew the father. Speaking of the father, Loki spotted him a ways behind the boy, arguing with a red-headed man who was surrounded by several red-headed children and a red-headed woman. Malfoy said something that enraged the other man, who propelled himself forward and attacked with a right hook. There was a yell of, "Get him, Dad!" from a stocky red-headed teen and cries of, "No. Arthur, no!" from the woman, "Must be the wife." The teller rushed over and tried to break up the fight. Loki, seeing a chance to leave the Potters, mostly the furious James, behind, quickly forced his way through the crowd to stop them. He was beaten to it by the massive Hagrid, who literally grabbed both of them by the scruff of the neck and pulled them apart. The look of pure malice on Malfoy's face could have killed small, fluffy creatures. "Here, girl. Take your book, it's the best your father can give you," he snarled at the smallest redhead as he thrust an old battered book into her hands. He then freed himself from Hagrid's grip, beckoned to the boy who'd spoken up earlier, who'd been arguing with Darren and insulting the Grangers, and swept out of the shop. "Good day, Rubius. Are you well?" Loki asked the half-giant who was busy straightening the other man's robes. Loki liked the halfling. He was more intelligent than the giants of today, but lacked the viciousness of the ancient Jotnar. Sure, he was a bit innocent, but that just made Loki want to look out for him and ensure he was okay. "Oh, Professor," said Hagrid as he turned. "Didn't see you there. Can't complain much. Had to get some flesh-eating slug repellent. Bloody things are ruinin' the school cabbages." "Wait, Professor?" "Him?" came a startled cry from behind Loki. It seemed James had followed him over. Hagrid suddenly looked nervous as he realized he'd let slip something other people didn't know. "Well, looks like the cat's out of the bag now. Rubius." Loki laughed. "And yes, Mr. Potter. I shall be acting as defense against the dark arts this year. On my way home from Peru I was unlucky, careless really, and bitten by a Peruvian vipertooth. Healers advised I take some time off to recover. I checked the wanted ads and saw Hogwarts was looking for a new teacher, so I applied. The good headmaster decided I was the best man for the job." "Ya were the only man for the job," Hagrid spoke up. "No one else applied." This got a laugh out of the crowd. Loki sat in a small cafe in King's Cross Station. He was watching the students and their families head towards the e-press. Loki spotted a mass of red rushing towards the barrier. It took him a moment to realize it was the family from the book signing, the Weasleys. Hagrid they were called. Among the mass of red was a dark-haired boy with glasses. "Oh, seems Darren stayed with friends last night," Loki mused. "Looks like they overslept as well. Train leaves in 5. Loki watched as the Weasleys entered the barrier, but raised an eyebrow when Darren and the youngest boy, whose name he hadn't heard, bounced off the barrier. Loki rose to pay his bill and find out what happened. By the time the girl at the till had finished getting his change and he'd made his way over to the boys, it was too late. The train had departed. "Problems, boys?" he asked with a small smile. "Oh, no, we just lost control of the trolleys," Darren answered as he looked up. "Professor, it's you. Look, something is wrong with the barrier. We just bounced right off." "I know, I was everything," Loki told him. "Now if you could step aside, I'll see if I can find out what caused it to seal this early." Loki waved his wand and forced the barrier to open again. "Right, it's open." Seems someone purposely closed it. Well, it's too late for you to catch the train, so I'll have to take you via my portkey. But first, let's tell your parents where you got to. Don't want them to panic. As Loki stepped through the barrier, he was almost knocked over by a frantic Mrs. Weasley. As he steadied himself, he actually was knocked over by an even more frantic Lily Potter. Grumbling under his breath, Loki rose up and turned a dagger-filled glare at the snickering James Potter. Loki gave a polite cough to gain the attention of the mothers. The boys are fine. However, Loki checked his watch. If they don't grab a hold of this rucksack at 10 past, they'll be left behind when the portkey activates, and then you'll have to take them to Hogwarts. So you may want to calm down. Having said that, Loki picked up his rucksack and turned, searching for the Auror who would be stationed on the platform. I'd love to stay and chat, but I've got to inform that Auror over there that someone's been messing with the barrier. Boys, remember, if you want to catch a ride, have a grip of the rucksack at 10 past. With that, he was off. The families approached him with a minute to spare. A quick, "Thank you," from the fathers and an embarrassed, "Sorry," from the mothers was all that was said before the trio disappeared. As a way to travel, portkey ranked as Loki's 8th most hated method. Thankfully, it was quick and accurate. With a flick of his wand, Loki caused the boys' baggage to float into the air above him and set off towards the castle, the boys tailing behind. They traveled in silence, all three still feeling a bit uneasy after arriving. As they passed several large coaches, Loki stopped and smiled. "Greetings, Rubeus," Loki called out. Darren turned and saw Hagrid's large form peek around one of the coaches. "Hello there, Professor," the friendly groundskeeper replied. "All set for the..." "Darren, Ron, what are ye doing here this early?" "Bit of trouble with the barrier, meant they missed the train. Luckily I was passing and could take them with me," Loki explained. "Just on our way to see the headmaster to tell him actually. Is he in his office?"
"Yep. Just finishing off some paperwork before the feast, I think," Hagrid replied. "Oh, read them papers you sent. Interesting stuff."
"Really? Well, Locke asked me to check some things while I'm here. Think you could answer a few quick questions?" Loki asked. He turned and addressed Darren and Ron. "Boys, you know the middle courtyard? Well, the headmaster's tower entrance in on the eastern side. The password for the gargoyle is sherbet lemon. Go on ahead. I catch up once I've finished talking to Rubeus and dropped your gear with the elves." Darren and Ron left Professor Lockhart and Hagrid talking about something called Thestrals and headed off towards the headmaster's tower, as instructed. While talking through the castle, they talked about what could have caused the barrier to close. They stopped when a voice rang out behind them. "And what, pray tell, are you doing here?" Both turned to see Severus Snape, potion master and head of Slytherin House, staring at them. "Ah, Potter. Why am I not surprised? So, the train isn't good enough for the famous Darren Potter and his faithful sidekick Weasley. Just had to be different, to be special, did we, boys?" "No, sir, it was the barrier at King's Cross, its silence," said Snape coldly. "Was it your father, Potter? Or one of his worthless friends? Who helped you?" "That, Severus, would be me." After finishing with Hagrid and dropping the boys' trunks off with a house elf, Loki set off after them. As he entered the middle courtyard, he spotted them talking with one of the other teachers. As he got closer, Loki realized that Snape seemed to be working himself up into a fury. "Silence," said Snape coldly. "Was it your father, Potter? Or one of his worthless friends? Who helped you?" "That, Severus, would be me," Loki called out. Snape spun around and eyed Loki with a withering glare. Snape's eyes took in Loki's muggle clothing, jeans and a battered, old leather jacket worn over a plain white shirt, and the man made no effort to hide his disdain. Loki felt a small pressure on his mind and knew the potion master was attempting to enter his mind via legilimency. Loki responded by slamming down hard on the probe and using it to send a message. Snape visibly flinched as the words, "Get out of my head, you pathetic little worm," thundered through his mind. Before the man could recover, Loki turned to Darren and Ron, pointed at the door to the tower and made a shooing motion with his hand. Loki then turned back to Snape and warned him to never try that again, or he would end up a mindless husk. Loki then turned on his heel and followed to boys. It was breakfast time on the first day of term and Loki was scanning the tables searching for his, for lack of a better term, brother. He hadn't gotten a chance to speak much with Darren yesterday, what with him needing to set up his classroom, office and sleeping quarters on top of explaining how the barrier had been closed by someone or something and that was why the boys had missed the train to Dumbledore, twice. Then before the feast the headmaster had called Loki to his office and politely asked him not to threaten other staff members. It seemed Snape ran to his benefactor with a sob story after their encounter, reminded Loki of that Mediterranean war god who ran off and complained to Daddy when someone actually fought back. Pathetic indeed. Oh well, at least Darren would be in his first ever class later that day and Loki was looking forward to seeing what the boy was like. Looking away from the students, Loki focused on his meal. Kobold cooking was incredible and Loki had to force himself to limit the amount he ate to acceptable human portions. He'd just have the kobolds, or house elves as they were now called, send him up several helpings when he finished up in the hall. After lunch the second-year Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs made their way up to the Dada class. Their mood was mild. Many, mostly the girls, were babbling and going on about the dashing Gilderoy Lockhart. Several of the boys were excited about meeting someone as well known as him and the remaining boys didn't think much of him. Dad knew him in school. Darren told Ron. Said he was a joke, okay on theory but terrible with the practical aspect. And have you read his books? They read like Muggle fairy tales. Dad thinks he lies or steals credit about what's done. He taught Mr. Lysmith, the man who wrote Dark Defense, the TED book. Hermione spoke up as they entered the classroom. And he has those awards. Besides, do you think Professor Dumbledore would hire someone who couldn't do the job correctly? Well, Dumbledore did let you know who teach here last year, and Hagrid did say how Lockhart was the only man to apply. Oh, and he got those awards for the things he's claimed to have done. Ron countered. Either way, we'll find out now. Here he comes. Welcome class. So enjoying your first day back? Loki asked as he entered the classroom from his adjoining office. Since I didn't teach here last year, I've no way of knowing how far you got in your studies. My predecessor, Professor Quirrell, left very few class plans. You are however using Locke's book, Dark Defense, and so I've devised a simple way of identifying how far along you are. A test. This got a collective groan from the class, Hermione included. Now. It only covers the first quarter of the book and results won't count for your end-of-year grades. Just try to answer as many questions as you can. Leave it blank if you haven't studied the topic yet. You have 35 minutes. With that Loki waved his wand, causing the class copies of the book to levitate several feet about their desks and stacks of paper to appear in front of each student. Loki stared at the students for a short while before informing them that they had 32 minutes remaining. Loki felt his first week teaching went well, apart from the rumors that he'd threatened to kill Dumbledore. All he'd said was if Snape kept hiding behind the man's coattails every time he provoked someone stronger than him, eventually someone would plow through said coattails to get at him. The other teachers were divided over this. Some appeared scandalized he would take back to the headmaster, while others cheered him on for standing up to Snape's bullying behavior. It had taken him nearly 3/4 of an hour to convince Hagrid that he hadn't threatened the man's idol. But it was the weekend and so Loki planned to explore the grounds a bit, maybe even see if Hagrid was up for a few drinking games down in the local tavern. As he was passing the Quidditch pitch Loki heard someone shriek, "How dare you!" and decided to investigate. He arrived in time to see Darren point his wand under another student's arm, possible Ly Flint from Slytherin, and curse Draco Malfoy. As the rest of the Slytherin team reached for their wands Loki intervened. Enough! Loki bellowed. What is going on here? Potter, why did you attack a fellow student? Loki studied the other boy's face, taking in all the boils and sores that Darren's spell had caused. He called Hermione a mudblood. Darren responded as if it explained and justified his actions. Ymir's balls, Loki wondered, who thought the kid it's okay to attack people if they say things you don't like? Most likely his father or Black. From what Loki gathered from Harry's memories, neither ever showed sorrow over their bullying Slytherins. Flint, take young Malfoy to the hospital wing. I don't know any healing magic and don't want any of you lot trying to fight it in case something goes wrong. Loki ordered. And you Potter, 5 points from Gryffindor in detention tonight. But that's not fair. Ron whined. Malfoy isn't being punished. That is because calling a fellow student an insulting name is frowned upon, but not against school rules. Loki explained. However, heing a fellow student is against school rules and Darren should consider himself lucky I caught him rather than some of the other members of staff. Since we are on the Quidditch pitch and most of you are wearing Quidditch robes, this could be considered a Quidditch foul and see him banned from flying for the rest of the year, or even his remaining time at the school. Instead, he's lost a few points that young Hermione over there will regain come class on Monday and has to spend an hour or two copying pages out of a book later tonight. Quite frankly, considering how vicious that spell was, I think the punishment is too lenient. Darren, look, you need to learn when to fight with your fists and WHERN to fight with your tongue. A few well-delivered insults and young Malfoy would have been a laughing stock. Instead you attacked and made yourself the loser. Net time, think before you act. Everyone was quiet as they realized how lucky Darren had been. The silence was broken when Hermione asked what mudblood meant. It's about the most insulting thing he could think of. Ron said. Mudblood's a really foul name for someone who was Muggle-born, you know, non-magical parents. There are some wizards, like Malfoy's family, who think they're better than everyone else because they're what people call pure blood. Loki resisted the urge to roll his eyes and explain the proper meaning of the term. It was a basic insult directed at mountain or earth giants or those descended from such giants. Hell, Loki himself used it as an embarrassing nickname for Thor when the boy was young, on account of his mother being one. Loki noticed how Ron was still going on about the term and decided to end it before it became a full-blown rant. Be that as it may, you cannot punish a person for their opinions. Loki said as he turned to leave. I'll leave you to continue your practice, but remember Darren. Detention with me tonight at 8 o'clock sharp. Oh, and before I go, remember what I said. Insulting classmates is frowned on but not illegal. Net time Malfoy or student angers you, insult them. For young Malfoy I'd recommend calling him a pillow-eating Nancy boy. This was met by gasps from the older students, although the meaning of the insult went over the heads of Darren, Ron and Hermione, but not in the headmaster's presence. He may take offense. At 8 o'clock Darren knocked on the door to Professor Lockhart's office. The door opened a minute later to show the man wearing jeans and a shirt instead of robes. The man seemed to dislike wearing robes and wore Muggle clothing whenever he could. He beckoned Darren in and led him into the office at the back of the class. Darren studied the room for a moment. There were numerous weapons mounted on the walls alongside several displays containing snapped wands. Beside each wand was a name. It took Darren a moment to realize that they must have belonged to witches and wizards the professor had beaten in his travels. There was also copies of old sketches and pictures of paintings on the walls. The room reminded Darren of a small museum he'd visited with his family shortly before Harry died. It had been in Germany and was dedicated to old Germanic legends. There is the book you'll be copying out of. I've also provided quills and parchment. Lockhart explained. You may begin. Darren mined the book and laughed. It was a book of insults. Thousands upon thousands of them, and it looked like the professor had some as well. Shaking his head, Darren set about writing. After about an hour there was a knock on the door and Professor Flitwick entered. Gilderoy. Sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if I could take up a few moments of your time. Oh, Mr. Potter. What are you doing here? The tiny teacher asked. Detention. Lockhart replied. And of course. Keep on working, Darren. I'll return shortly. With that the two professors left. What had started as a small discussion on the meaning of the runes involved in warding early the day before had blown into a full-scale argument between Loki, who was working on old Asgardian warding, Flitwick, working on goblin warding, and Professor Babbling, who thought study of ancient runes at Hogwarts and was working on what the Tet book said. Loki finally ended it by pointing out several mistranslations in the book and challenging Flitwick to a warding contest the next day. Both would construct their wards and have someone else try and breach them. When Loki got back to his office around midnight, he was shocked to see Darren still there. He told the boy to run along after giving him a note to present to anyone who stopped him for being out of bounds. Sir, Darren asked as he left, "What does the plaque over your door mean?" Loki stared at the plague over the door to his office. It translates as, "This is the world we live in, and these are the hands we're given. Use them and let's start trying to make it a place worth living in." It's just something I picked up somewhere. Locke has dozens of them. Little quips and quotes. I just happened to like that one. Since Darren had been raised in the wizarding world, he missed the musical quote and could only say, "Oh, well, good night, sir," Darren said as he left. As he neared the door at the back of the classroom, Darren heard something. It was a voice to chill the bone marrow, a voice of breathtaking, ice-cold venom. Come to me. Let me rip you. Let me tear you. Let me kill you." Darren stopped and turned, searching for the source of the voice. He stared at Loki for a moment, saw that Loki hadn't reacted to anything, shook his head and headed off to bed. When Loki was ready to retire for the night, he scanned his chambers and wondered aloud. I wonder who that was. No, I wonder what that was. October had arrived, spreading a damp chill over the grounds and into the castle. Not that Loki was bothered. What did bother Loki was the raindrops the size of bullets that thundered down for days on end and turned the paths across the grounds into muddy streams. Made traveling down to Hagrid's hut or the taverns difficult. Which was a problem when the headmaster had banned all alcohol in the school apart from that served at feasts. The weather having forced Loki to stay inside, with several tons of stone over his head, meant he could at least use the library to research topics that interested him, reasoning that if he's gonna be crushed it may as well happen after he's learned what he came to learn. On one particularly wild day, Loki came across Darren speaking with the Gryffindor ghost, Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington, or nearly Headless Nick as the students called him. Loki tended to avoid the ghosts, feeling the dead should be in Niflheim or Valhalla and not wandering around here on Midgard. Loki overheard Darren be invited to a Death Day party on Halloween. Well, it wasn't any of his business what the boy did in his spare time. Speaking of Darren, Loki was rather disappointed in his brother. The boy was reckless and quick-tempered. He, like most of the light, was also bigoted against the darker families. Loki had even had to call him on it a few times, pointing out the hypocritical nature of insulting, hating simply because Slytherins don't like Muggleborns. Loki got the feeling that particular comment made him rather unpopular in the Gryffindor common room. Not that Loki really cared, mind you. There were, at best, 2 people in the whole school that Loki felt would pose anything resembling a challenge should ever fight the staff. Halloween came around pretty quickly. Loki was in good humor since there would be alcohol at the feast for the teachers. He went to class that morning with a spring in his step and a full roast chicken in his mouth. He needed the calories. Loki spent most of his first class, 4th year Gryffindors and Ravenclaws telling stories and trading jokes with his students. A subtle compulsion near the end on one of the Weasley boys, Fred, if Loki's nose was right, meant that a rather unique map was left behind when the bell rang. Loki gazed down on the classroom occupied by Gilderoy Lockhart, and smiled. A few simple binding spells over the pre-Easting enchantments and Loki was hidden completely. Good. Wouldn't want anyone knowing where I go, Loki said as he retrieved a blank piece of parchment from his desk. Now to copy the layout of the school, never know when it'll be needed. Loki wiped the map and hid both it and the copy in his desk as another class entered. That evening Loki traded seats and joined Hagrid near the end of the table. The two spent the whole feast drinking and telling amusing tales. Loki soon felt like he was home in Asgard with friends, something that immediately soured his mood. Thankfully the feast was coming to an end and Loki could leave without anyone noticing his darkening mood. As Loki began to ascend the grand staircase he heard someone shriek about a cat. Loki set off with a number of other teachers behind him. What's going on here? What's going on? Filch demanded to know as he shouldered his way through a large crowd of students. He'd heard one of the brats shout something about mudbloods and was investigating, hoping to get one of the little beasts in trouble. Then he saw his cat, Mrs. Norris, and fell back, clutching his face in horror. My cat! My cat! What happened to Mrs. Norris? He shrieked before his eyes fell on Darren. He screeched. You've murdered my cat. You've killed her. I'll kill you all. Argus! Dumbledore bellowed as he arrived on the scene, followed by a number of other teachers. In seconds, he swept past Darren, Ron and Hermione and detached Mrs. Norris from the torch bracket. Come with me, Argus, he said to Filch. You too, Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, Miss Granger. My office is nearest, Headmaster, just upstairs, Lockhart said, stepping forward to e-mine the cat. Perhaps we should. Yes, thank you, Gilderoy, Dumbledore replied. The silent crowd parted to let them pass. Lockhart followed with a concerned look on his face, as did Professors McGonagall and Snape. As they entered Lockhart's darkened office, Darren saw that additional tapestries had been added to the walls. Lockhart flicked his wand, igniting the wicks of the candles on his desk, and gestured for Dumbledore to put Mrs. Norris down so she could be e-mined. Lockhart looked at Darren, Ron and Hermione before pointing at a battered old couch on the edge of the candlelight's pool. The trio changed tense looks before sinking onto it. The tip of Dumbledore's long, crooked nose was barely an inch from Mrs. Norris's fur. He was gazing at her through his half-moon spectacles, his long fingers prodding and poking. McGonagall was bent almost as close, and Snape loomed behind them, half in shadow while wearing a most peculiar expression, as though he was trying very hard not to smile. Lockhart had taken a simple scroll of parchment and a long, acid-green quill out of a drawer and set them on a table near the couch, but not before placing the quill in his mouth and ing on it for a second. He then moved over to a large cabinet as the quill began to write automatically on the parchment. The trio noticed it was writing in old runes rather than English. From the cabinet he removed a large glass and a bottle of fire whiskey, poured and downed a small measure before pouring a larger measure and handing the glass to Filch, who was sitting in Lockhart's chair at the desk with his head buried in his hands. As much as Darren detested Filch, Darren couldn't help feeling a bit sorry for him. Well, is she alive or not? Lockhart asked rather bluntly. This prompted an agonized cry from Filch and a rather harsh stare from McGonagall. Snape appeared annoyed while Dumbledore simply turned to Filch and said Mrs. Norris was not dead. Hermione noticed the quill backtrack and cross out several bullet points worth of runes. Not dead, choked Filch, looking at Mrs. Norris. But why is she all stiff and frozen? Petrified most likely. Lockhart spoke up as he leaned over the cat wearing a pair of thick-framed glasses, the lenses of which glowed a fainted red, and waved his wand in a lazy, figure-8 pattern over her stiff form. The question is how? Ask him, Filch screamed, turning his blotched and tear-stained face to Darren. No second year could have done this, said Dumbledore firmly. It would take dark magic of the most advanced. He did it, Filch spat, his blotchy face purpling. You saw what he wrote on the wall. He found, in my office. He knows I'm a Filch's face worked horribly. He knows I'm a squib, he finished. I never touched Mrs. Norris, Darren said loudly, uncomfortable with everyone, including Lockhart, who was still focused on Mrs. Norris, looking at him. Rubbish, snarled Filch. If I might speak, Headmaster, Snape said from the shadows, Potter and his friends may have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He said, a slight sneer curling his mouth as though he doubted it. But we do have a set of suspicious circumstances here. Why were they in the upstairs corridor at all? Why weren't they at the Halloween feast? Darren, Ron and Hermione launched into an EPLA nation about the Death Day party. There were hundreds of ghosts, they'll tell you we were there. But why not join the feast afterwards? Said Snape. Why go up to that corridor? Because, Darren said, his heart thumping very fast. What could he say that sounded less far-fetched than a disembodied voice only he could hear? Because we were tired and wanted to go to bed, he finished. Without any supper? Snape asked, a triumphant smile flickering across his face. The smile widened when Ron's stomach rumbled loudly as he tried to say they hadn't been hungry. I suggest, Headmaster, that Potter is not being entirely truthful. It might be a good idea if he were deprived of certain privileges until he is ready to tell us the whole story. I personally feel he should be taken off the Gryffindor Quidditch team until he is ready to be honest. Really, Severus? McGonagall said sharply. I see no reason to stop the boy playing Quidditch. This cat wasn't hit over the head with a broomstick. There is no evidence at all that Potter has done anything wrong. Dumbledore was giving Darren a searching look. As he opened his mouth to speak, he, along with everyone else, jumped when Lockhart spoke up. The boy had no hand in this, nor did young Weasley or Granger. This wasn't done by human magic. Maybe a potion, although unlikely. My guess is either a creature or an enchanted artifact. See for yourself. As he was speaking, Lockhart had removed the glasses he was wearing and was offering them to Dumbledore. While the headmaster replaced his half-moon spectacles with the thick-rimmed ones, Lockhart replaced the parchment the quill had been writing on with a blank one. As you can see, no traces of magic. The detectors would have activated if an artifact powerful enough to do this activated in Hogwarts. Meaning a creature. Only two I'm aware of with petrifying abilities like this are Gorgons and Atrices. That said, a Gorgon would have caused the skin to harden slightly and Atrice's breath would still be detectable. Basilisks are out as they kill instantly, like most animals that don't eat live prey. And now, professors, if you both are done panicking about your silly Quidditch cup, could you perhaps help with trying to solve what happened? McGonagall had the decency to look ashamed while Snape eyed Lockhart with a spiteful glare. He did, however, quickly avert his gaze when Lockhart narrowed his eyes. Dumbledore told the trio they could go, which they quickly did with a joking, "Just be sure not to leave town. I may have questions from Lockhart." Loki watched the kids leave before pouring Filch another glass of fire whiskey and turning to stare at the other teachers. Well, any theories, and please Severus, none that pin the blame on young Potter or his friends. Sure, they are talented, but nowhere near this talented. Hell, I'd say you'd be hard pushed to manage something like this. What about Mrs. Norris? Filch asked, on the verge of tears. We will be able to cure her, Argus, Dumbledore said patiently. Madam Sprout recently managed to procure some mandrakes. As soon as they're full size, I will have a potion made which shall revive Mrs. Norris. In the meantime, I'll track down whatever is responsible, Argus, Loki assured his fellow member of staff. After all, it may pose a risk to the student body, and as Dada teacher I am responsible for the defense of the school and the protection of the students in addition to my duties as an instructor's. Or was that changed, headmaster? No, Gilderoy, but it is unnecessary, Dumbledore answered. I'll look into it. Now, we shall achieve nothing else here tonight. We should retire for the night. Headmaster. Snape spoke up. About Potter innocent until proven guilty, Severus, he replied firmly. Loki handed Filch the remainder of the fire whiskey bottle and helped the man to his feet. Come along, Argus, I'll walk you back to your chambers. Good night, headmaster, Severus, Minerva. Good night, Gilderoy, Dumbledore said, before gently picking up Mrs. Norris and carrying her out of the office. For a few days, the school could talk about little else than the attack on Mrs. Norris. Filch kept it fresh in everyone's mind by pacing the spot where she had been attacked, as though he thought the attacker might come back. Many had seen him scrubbing the message on the wall with Mrs. Scour's all-purpose magical mess remover, but to no effect. The words continued to gleam as brightly as ever on the stone. When Filch wasn't guarding the scene of crime, he was sulking red-eyed through the corridors, lunging out at unsuspecting students and trying to put them in detention for things like breathing loudly and looking happy. Darren had noticed a few students giving him a wide breath. A few days after Halloween, Justin Finch Fletchley even sped off in the opposite direction when Darren met him in the halls. Even Hermione was acting weird. While it was normal for the bushy-haired girl to spend a lot of time reading, but she now did little else. And neither Darren or Ron could get a response out of her. She also seemed to be in rather poor humor owing to the fact she'd forgotten to pack her copy of Hogwarts, a history, and all the library's copies had a 2-week waiting list because other students wanted them. The trio set off for History of Magic, which was thought by Professor Binns the only ghost on staff. He was the single most boring teacher in the whole school and was known to put students to sleep in under an hour, regardless of the day's topic, which was almost always goblin rebellions. However, today was different. Today everyone paid attention when Hermione asked about the Chamber of Secrets. Professor Binns blinked. "My subject is History of Magic," he said in his dry, wheezy voice. "I deal in facts, Miss Granger, not myths and legends." Binns cleared his throat with a small noise that sounded like chalk snapping and tried to continue. "Please, sir, don't legends always have a basis in fact?" she asked. "Well," Professor Binns began slowly. "Yes, one could argue that, I suppose. However, the legend of which you speak is such a sensational, even ludicrous tale that I highly doubt he ever had a basis in fact. And now, Miss Grant, if you continue to interrupt, I shall be forced to ask you to leave." Loki looked up from the papers he'd been correcting as one of the second-year classes entered, Gryffindor and Hufflepuff, and took their assigned seats. When they had all taken their seats, Loki took the roll and prepared to collect the assignments he'd set the class. As he stared, Loki noticed Ron's hand raised. "Yes, Ron?" Loki asked. "If you don't have your work, then you'd better have a good excuse." "No, sir," Ron said quickly, holding up the parchment he'd done his homework on. "I wanted to ask you, have you ever heard of the Chamber of Secrets?" Loki scanned the classroom, taking in the interested faces of all the students. He was silent a moment before he simply returned to collecting the homework. When he was finished, Loki walked to his desk and answered Ron. "To answer your question, I have, Mr. Weasley. While I wouldn't say I'm an expert on the matter, I know of the legend and based on historical evidence have come to my own conclusion about the matter." "Could you tell us?" Ron asked a bit nervously. "We'll vote," Loki answered. "Either we continue with the lesson and you all find out about the legend yourselves, or I tell you the legend but you have to read what we'd have been studying today yourselves and do the assignment without advice from me. Now raise your hand if you want to hear about the Chamber of Secrets." Loki watched as almost all the students raised their hands. "Very well. I'm sure you all know that Hogwarts was founded little over 1,000 years ago, the precise date is unknown, by the 4 greatest British witches and wizards of the time. The houses are named in honor of them: Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw and Slytherin. This castle was built to house and train young magic users far from Muggle persecution." Loki paused and scanned the room, stalling for time while he worked out the best way to phrase the rest of the story. For a time all was well. The founders thought those who attended the school, but disagreements soon sprang up. A rift formed between Slytherin and Gryffindor over the matter of Muggleborns. Slytherin felt it would be better to keep magical learning contained to only those with magical parentage. He believed that Muggleborns students were untrustworthy, understandable considering the times. The disagreements became more and more heated until Slytherin himself had had enough and left the school. Loki paused and took a sip of water from a glass that sat on his desk, and continued. "This is all accepted fact and is backed up with historical evidence. However, the legend of the Chamber, stories told by those who knew Slytherin. It says that Slytherin built a secret chamber somewhere in the castle and which only he or his heirs would be able to unseal. It is said that the heir would come to the school and open the chamber, realizing the horror within, and that he, or she, would cleanse the school of any that were unworthy to learn magic. The school has been checked many times but no one has ever found anything. To be honest, I don't really think it exists." Loki looked at a small clock and then addressed the class again. "We still have a little while to go, so ask any questions you have and, if I can, I'll answer them." Hermione was the first to speak. "Sir, what exactly did you mean by the horror within?" "No one knows, Hermione," Loki replied. "The most likely case of wild mass guessing says it's a monster of some kind. The fact that it's been over 1,000 years and no one has seen hide nor hair of it lends to the belief that it's all bullshit, I mean rubbish." The ending got a laugh from the kids. Ernie Macmillan spoke up net. But sir, if the chamber can only be opened by Slytherin's heir, no one else would be able to get in, would they? True, Ernie, true. Loki countered. But no entrance at all has ever been found. To my knowledge, every headmaster and headmistresses has conducted at least one search. They have all failed to find even a speck of evidence. But sir, piped up Parvati Patil, you'd probably have to use dark magic to open it in. Just because someone doesn't use dark magic does not mean they cannot use it. Loki snapped harshly. This school has seen many dark wizards and witches teach here. Our current headmaster has most likely forgotten more about the darkest forms of magic than you lot will ever learn. Sir. Darren spoke slowly. You said, understandable considering the times, about Slytherin not wanting to teach Muggle-borns. Why? Loki took a moment to calm himself before answering. Firstly, let me say that I do not support blood purity in any form. I do, however, support the idea of limiting your exposure to potential enemies. Now, if any of you ever get the chance to read one of the few surviving samples of Salazar Slytherin's writings, you'll all be shocked to see that not once is the 10th century equivalent of mudblood used. I know I was. The man was concerned with witch hunts and the fact that many were started by Muggleborns, covering their own ass, or by the relatives of Muggleborns who recognized the signs. You'll notice I said the argument was over the trustworthiness of Muggleborns and had nothing to do with their blood itself. He even opposed the idea of accepting pure or half-blooded students who'd been raised by Muggles for fear of alerting the fanatics. Loki finished off the glass of water and continued. If you check the school records, you'll find that between 1580 and 1630 the number of Muggleborns that received a letter to almost a third of what it had been before that. One of the main reasons I doubt it exists is the tale mentions destroying those unworthy as opposed to untrustworthy like Slytherin spoke of. The rest of the class progressed with Loki answering questions or challenging points from the students. At the end of class, Loki held Parvati back and apologized for his harsh outburst in relation to her somewhat naive comment. As he prepared to set off to the Great Hall for dinner, a house elf appeared with a note from the headmaster. Gilderoy, please refrain from discussing any topic related to the Chamber of Secrets within earshot of students. We wouldn't want to feed fuel to any panic now, would we? Loki read aloud. Ymir's ball sack. About a week had passed since Lockhart had explained exactly what the Chamber of Secrets was meant to be. Darren, Ron and Hermione had all come to the conclusion that Malfoy was the most likely suspect as to who was the real heir. Hermione had mentioned trying to use something called Polyjuice Potion, but they had no way to get it. Unfortunately, the book containing it was in the restricted section. Darren had suggested trying to pass off their interest in the book as purely theoretical, but they knew no teacher in the school was thick enough to fall for that. The trio had just finished their final class for the day and were on their way to dinner when Ron paused and took off in the other direction. I'll catch up in a few. He called over his shoulder before turning a corner and disappearing from view. Darren and Hermione just stared down the hall after him in confusion before turning to each other with identical, "What just happened?" looks on their faces. Ron arrived at the Gryffindor table about 5 minutes after them with a large grin on his face and discreetly passed a piece of paper to Hermione. You'll get less weird looks handing this in, he said, the smile never leaving his face, and he began to eat. Hermione looked at the paper and saw it was a note authorizing the removal of most potenti potions from the restricted section, until the end of the school year if necessary, signed by Professor Lockhart. What, I mean how? Hermione asked, very confused. Ron's smile just grew larger as he answered simple, I asked. The second-year Gryffindors were just finishing up a Dada class. Loki watched as they gathered up their books and headed towards the door. Things were getting bad, students worried and teachers unable to do a thing to help. The headmaster was actively trying to suppress information on the problem and was even stonewalling Loki when he attempted to investigate himself. The man had his reasons, Loki hoped. Loki followed the students out and down the hall, increasing his stride to catch up with Darren and his friends. How's the arm? Loki asked in reference to the Quidditch injury from the previous Saturday. Fine, sir. Do they know what caused the bludger to go rouge like that? Darren answered as he nervously rubbed his right arm. Rolanda is checking. She's quite annoyed actually. Loki chuckled. Real big fan of fair play, she is. If she finds whoever did that, she's make him, or her, suffer for it. Well, all glad you're well, and remember those essays are due Monday, Loki said as he descended the stairs and set off for the staff room. Loki settled himself into one of the chairs and helped himself to several of biscuits as he went through the events of the first Quidditch match he'd ever seen. Loki settled down net to Aurora Sinistra in one of the stands on the midpoint of the pitch. He understood the basics of how Quidditch was played thanks to Lockhart's memories, but to actually see it would be something else. Loki lamented the limits his vessel had. If he'd been using his own body, his eyes would have been able to keep track of the snitch and all the players even at full speed. It wasn't even 1 minute into the match before Loki realized something was wrong. One of the bludgers kept targeting Darren. It even halted in mid-air to redirect itself towards him. Loki saw one of the Weasley twins signal for a timeout and watched as the bludger hovered near the Gryffindor team. "Pardon me," Loki said to Sinistra as he began to move down the aisle. "I need to speak with the headmaster. Something isn't right." Loki paused for a moment and forced his eyes to adjust the spectrum in which they saw things. The ability to do this was often called mage sight, or some such rubbish, but Loki couldn't care less about its name. All that mattered was it allowed him to see how the winds of magic flowed in his vicinity and to spot enchantments or detect traces of spellwork. Loki heard the whistle sound and set off as quickly as he could down the rickety staircase in through the stand. He'd seen what he needed to. Magic other than the standard charms had been added to that bludger and was making it target Darren. As he went, Loki conjured a pair of thick-framed glasses, the lenses of which glowed a faint red, so that he could justify being able to see the magic. As he reached the entrance to the stand Dumbledore was seated in, Loki heard a cheer ring out from the Gryffindor supporters and turned towards the pitch, where he saw Darren lying not far away and the bludger speeding towards his head. Loki cursed. Epulso. Loki cast the, relatively, safer of the two blasting curses to reduce to bludger to dust before it could kill his younger sibling. By the time Loki reached Darren, his teammates had begun to gather around him. The spectators all seemed to be making their way down towards the pitch. Move aside, move aside. Let me take a look," Loki said as he pushed his way past the Quidditch players. He studied the arm for a moment before adopting a solemn look. "Looks bad, Darren. I think we may have to amputate." The look of sheer pants-staining terror on the boy's face was too much and he laughed. "I'm joking. Let's get you to the hospital wing and Poppy will have that fight in no time." Loki conjured a floating stretcher under Darren, picked up the boy's broom and set off for the castle. As he passed Rolanda Hooch, he informed her that someone had clearly enchanted the bludger to target Darren. Flashback end Loki could have tried to fight it himself, but would have most likely destroyed every bone in Darren's arm. Loki decided he really needed to learn healing magic. Of course, Loki ended back in the hospital wing later that night with another student. He'd been up late correcting essays from the 4th years and had decided to get something to eat from the kitchens. As he descended into basement, Loki spotted a student standing frozen in his path coming up the steps. The girl's eyes were wide open and had a kind of deer-in-headlights look. Loki saw a prefect pin on her lapel and so prepared to send her on her way, but then Loki noticed she wasn't blinking, or moving at all for that matter. Her eyes were locked on the tip of the silver platter she held in her hands, and Loki noticed one of her feet was raised slightly off the ground, as though she stopped mid-step. "Ymir's frozen ball sack," Loki acclaimed. "Elf. Elf. Damn it, I need an elf now," Loki called as loud as he could. "Yes, Professor?" one of the school elves asked as he appeared beside Loki. "How's can SQU? Contact the headmaster and have him meet me at the hospital wing." "No, first alert the hospital wing, then the headmaster," Loki interrupted. He cast a quick look at the girl before adding, "Get Phileas as well. Tell him one of his students has been attacked." With that, Loki proceeded to place a charm on the platter, so nothing would be disturbed, and levitated the girl towards the hospital wing, leaving a startled and confused elf in his wake. Dumbledore arrived a moment or two after Loki with Flitwick hot on his heels. Loki didn't look up from the prone body of the girl, Penelope Clearwater, which he was studying under his pair of thick-framed glasses, a great way to justify being able to see magic. "Gilderoy, what happened?" Dumbledore asked as soon as he approached. The old man actually looked quite funny in his woolly dressing gown and nightcap, but Loki ignored it for now. "I was on my way down to the kitchens for a snack when I met her coming up," Loki explained. "Saw she was a prefect and figured she was just finished her rounds and decided to get something to eat before bed. Took me a few seconds to notice she'd been petrified. Charmed the platter so that nothing would fall off. Figured you'd want to see her as she was found with before we did anything, you know, in case any evidence was tampered with." Loki took off the glasses and handed them to Dumbledore. "Did you find anything, Gilderoy?" Flitwick asked, worry for his student evident in his voice. "No, same as the cat." Loki sighed. "I've told 2 of the elves to make sure nothing passes through the stairwell I found her on until I've checked it out. Regardless if they be student, professor or specter." Loki watched as the headmaster gently removed the tray from the girl's hands and set it aside on a bedside locker. "Headmaster, the chamber is no mere legend, is it?" Loki asked. "No, Gilderoy. It is not," Dumbledore replied. "I understand you said it was unnecessary, but I think I should actively investigate this, as well as start preparing the students in the most likely event that this thing attacks again," Loki stated. He'd have said more, but the 3 other heads of houses entered. "What's happened, Albus?" McGonagall asked urgently. "Another attack. Near the basements," Flitwick answered as he accepted the glasses from Dumbledore and started his own examination of Penelope. "What does this mean?" Sprout asked. "It means Dumbledore said that the Chamber of Secrets is indeed open again." "But Albus, surely." "Who?" McGonagall stuttered. "The question is not who," Dumbledore replied, his eyes on Penelope. "The question is how." As this e-change was occurring, Loki was watching Snape. At the mention of the basements, he'd quickly turned his attention on the girl before visibly reeling. You didn't need to be a mind reader to know he couldn't care since she wasn't one of his house. Loki's anger doubled when he remembered the thinking of all who shared the same mark as Snape when it came to Muggle-born wizards or witches. Snape waited until Dumbledore had finished speaking before speaking up. "Headmaster, what was Pot?" "Potter was not there this time, Severus, nor was Mr. Weasley or Miss Granger," Loki snapped. "In fact, there was no trace of any student, Gryffindor or otherwise, so please help us try and figure out what did this or piss of." Snape went red with rage and actually tried to draw his wand, only to stop when Dumbledore roared at both of them, chastising Loki for his language and Snape for being unhelpful. "Gilderoy, we shall speak tomorrow morning about what you suggested," spoke the headmaster slowly, as if he was talking to 2 very annoying children. "For now, there is nothing more we can do for this poor girl. Good night." Flashback end: Loki had followed the headmaster from the staff table the next morning to his office and began discussing how they could set about protecting the students. It was agreed that teachers and prefects would take extra patrols each night. Dumbledore insisted he'd handle the investigation into the chamber and Loki should focus on looking after students. Loki had even managed to convince the old man to allow a dueling club, to boost morale. Although Loki had the sickening feeling that the headmaster had thought up of a use of it that would piss him off when Dumbledore's eyes began to sparkle and a half-smile formed on his lips. Yes, it's a good idea," Dumbledore said as he nodded his head. "When can you start?" "I'll need a few weeks to speak with Phileas, learn the rules and traditions associated with professional dueling," Loki answered. "First class should happen before you release the kids for winter break." It took a few weeks for Loki to work out what would be acceptable to show the kids and what you get him kicked out of Hogwarts for reckless endangerment. For extra security, Loki decided to get Professor Babbling help him erect adjustable rune barriers around the dueling stages to protect the students from rogue spells. "I figured we'd start with the basics, stance bows, that sort of thing. Then show a few simple spells, disarming and stunning," Loki told Flitwick the night before the club's first meeting. "Then after Yule we'd divide them up. You take higher years and I'd take the younger years on different nights and move at a steady pace. Sound good?" Sounds good. When are we notifying the students? Flitwick asked back. Elves are putting up notes tonight. Loki answered. Well, time for my patrol. Good night, Phileas. Good night, Gilderoy. The diminutive professor called out as Loki left his office. Loki felt uneasy when he awoke. He wasn't sure why, as no attack was reported the night before. Nor was it the dueling club that would take place later that evening. A few short minutes speaking with Phileas assured Loki that wizards wouldn't recognize a real duel if they wandered right into it. Although, to be fair, nor would Loki, as long ago he mastered the kick the other guy in the crotch style of fighting and so never got into duels. Loki shrugged it off and set about preparing for the day ahead. Right. Loki said as his fifth-year class, Hufflepuff and Slytherin, prepared to leave. That's us done until New Year. Now over the break, I want you all to summarize the three main subgroups of lycanthropy, which are Lycanthropus magus, Lycanthropus simia and Lycanthropus iteris. Yuletime blessings to you all. As he watched the students leave, Loki noticed two arguing over something. I'm telling you it is rubbish, they were messing with you, Cedric Diggory said. No, it's true. Michael MCM replied. I'll bet you 5 galleons. Fine. Easiest money I'll ever make, Cedric said, accepting the bet. Sir, do you mind if we ask you a few quick questions? Not at all, I'll even answer them if you want. Loki laughed. What do you want to know? Well, seeing as how there are different types of werewolves, are there different types of vampires? Cedric asked. Yes and no, Loki answered. What we call vampires have no subgroups or variations. There are, however, creatures who exhibit similar strengths or weaknesses, but they aren't really vampires. Many of these creatures have either died out or only appeared in the myths of other races. Oh, maybe it was something else then. Michael said downheartedly. Can any of those other creatures survive in sunlight? Oh, yes. Many of them can withstand exposure as well as humans. Some even better than humans. Loki said before going quiet for a moment. I remember even hearing about an old vampire legend that spoke of a realm where they could stand under the sun and even ruled over humans, keeping them as cattle. I think the name was Nosgoth? Really? Michael asked, a smile forming on his face. Loki guessed the argument had been over if there were sunlight-resistant vampires, so, do any of those creatures sparkle in the light? Loki just stared speechless. If any denizen of Asgard passed by, they'd be in shock to see Loki at a loss for words. Cedric had buried his face in his hands and was muttering something about finding intelligent friends. Truth be told, Loki'd be saying the same. No, Michael. None of them do. Loki began, using the tone of voice reserved for small and somewhat slow children. In fact, to my knowledge, no creature has ever been discovered that sparkles when under sunlight. Perhaps one such creature iced it long ago, but if so, it was most likely killed off and devoured by smarter creatures who understood the benefits of stealth and camouflage. As Cedric and Michael left, Loki wrote a quick note for his incoming class, stuck it to the outside of his classroom door and set off for the hospital wing in search of a headache cure. It was just before 8 when Darren and his friends arrived in the Great Hall. The long dining tables had been removed and replaced with a large golden stage near the back wall. As usual, thousands of candles hovered above in the air and it looked like most of the school had turned up, wand in hand. I wonder who'll be teaching us, said Hermione, as they made their way into the large crowd. Someone told me Professor Flitwick was a dueling champion when he was young. Maybe it'll be him. Or it could be Professor Lockhart. I mean, he really knows his stuff. As long as it's not, Darren began, but he ended on a groan. Was Lockhart, wearing a black, padded leather tunic and dark pants under a dull brown travel cloak, walked onto the main stage accompanied by none other than Snape, wearing his usual black. Lockhart waved his arm for silence and called, "Gather round, gather round." No, can everyone see me? Can you all hear me? Excellent. Lockhart turned and looked at Snape for a moment before continuing. Now, the headmaster has granted me permission to start this little dueling club. It's to train you all up in case you ever need to defend yourselves. Now, originally Professor Flitwick was going to assisting, but something came up. However, Professor Snape volunteered to step in as a replacement. Lockhart finished with a soft smile, but Darren could see that it didn't reach his eyes. The man was not happy about Snape being here and was making little effort to disguise it. Now, due to Phileas not being here, I guess we'll have to skip over the stances and bows since I don't actually know any of them. But I mean, none of you came to learn that, right? Lockhart continued, earning chuckles from the students. So Severus, I say we give them a little demonstration and then let them practice among themselves. I'd ask you all to step back slightly, but make sure you have a good view. And don't worry, you'll still have your potions master when I'm through with him. Lockhart made a point of waving his wand in a seemingly random pattern, causing the edge of the stage to shimmer and develop a faint bluish glow. Just a basic ward to block any wayward spells. Lockhart e-planed. Now note the sturdy grip on our wands and how we are standing, ready to dive to the side should we face a spell that would prove difficult to block. Control and mobility beat power every time. Lockhart counted down from 3 and then both of them swung their wands up and over their shoulders, Snape crying, "Expelliarmus," with a vicious smirk on his face. There was a flash of scarlet light and Lockhart was blasted back a few feet. His wand flew out of his hand, but he managed to snatch it before it sailed away. "Do you think he's all right?" Hermione squealed through her fingers. Darren saw Snape's smirk slowly fade as he watched Lockhart shake himself and stare at the man. Lockhart's usual lazy, half-smile was gone and his pale, blue eyes looked as cold as ice. "He looks like he could scare a Dementor," Ron whispered. Darren could only nod in agreement. "Expelliarmus, the disarming charm. Good choice to demonstrate," Lockhart said slowly, never breaking eye contact with Snape. "Thankfully, you underpowered it and I was only staggered. Had you meant to, I may have ended up cracking my head of the wall behind me." The second part was so heavily laced with sarcasm that Darren could actually taste it. Lockhart jumped off the stage and began moving through the crowd pairing people off. "If you'd care to help me, Severus, we can get them started on practicing," he called over his shoulder. Unfortunately for Darren, Snape got to him first. "Time to split up the dream team, I think," he sneered. "Weasley, you can partner with Finnegan. Potter, Mr. Malfoy, come over here. Let's see what you make of the famous Potter. And you, Miss Granger, can partner with Miss Bulstrode." Darren watched as Malfoy strutted over, smirking. Behind him walked a Slytherin girl who reminded Darren of an ogre. She was large and square, her heavy jaw jutted out aggressively. "Face you, opponent," Snape drawled. "Wands ready and—" Hold on. Lockhart cut in. "Young Percy over there just made a good point. We really should show the younger students how to shield themselves first. Now, maybe a few volunteers to show how it's done. Potter and Malfoy, up here now," Snape snapped, apparently annoyed at having the chance to watch Malfoy and Darren fight taken away from him. Lockhart stopped and made his way towards the stage, pausing to help Darren up. "Right, when Draco points his wand at you, do this," Lockhart said as he made a simple flicking action and recited the spell name. Darren saw Snape move closer to Malfoy and whisper something in his ear. Malfoy smirked and Darren nervously turned to Lockhart for a repeat demonstration. "Right, only use disarming or shielding charms. Nothing else," Lockhart told them, although Darren felt it was directed more at him than Malfoy. Once again Lockhart made a point of waving his wand in a seemingly random pattern, causing the edge shimmer and faint bluish glow to reappear. "Okay, face your partner, bow and begin," Lockhart called. Loki regretted letting these two demonstrate the second they began. Malfoy began casting on, and Darren didn't bother with shields or disarming, but thankfully neither went any further than low-level he's or gines. Muttering a quick, finite incantatum, and lowering the ward, Loki made his way towards the stage, meaning to give both of them a good yelling at. Of course that was before Draco did the single dumbest thing Loki had seen all year, including the vampire question. He cast again, with an angry cry of "Serpensortia." The little fool summoned a long black snake which prepared to strike. Darren panicked and tried to banish it, but only succeeded he knocking it across the stage. Enraged, hissing furiously, it slithered straight towards Justin Finch-Fletchley and raised itself up to strike. "Leave him," Darren called out to the snake. As the snake slumped to the floor, Darren looked up expecting to see relief or grateful, only to see the boy angry and afraid. "What the hell do you think you're playing at?" he shouted and stormed out. Loki quickly vanished the snake and cleared his throat. "Attention! Attention!" he called out. "Tonight's meeting is over. A note will be up before you all go home stating if and when the net meeting will be. Now back to your dorms." Loki watched as Ron tried to pull Darren out of the hall. "Snape, Malfoy and Potter remain," he added. Darren stopped at the entrance and turned. Professor Lockhart looked pretty annoyed. There was also the fact he called Snape. Well, Snape. Not Severus nor Professor, just Snape. Darren realized that Lockhart was actually angry, and to see the normally joyous and laid-back man like that meant bad news. Snape seemed to notice how he was addressed as well as he turned to confront Lockhart. "Why are you sending? Be quiet, you pathetic little worm." "Not another word. Is that clear?" Lockhart's voice could have frozen steam. "I heard your advice to Malfoy, and it's because he was acting on your instruction that I won't push for expulsion. However, 50 points from Slytherin and 2 weeks' worth of detention for recklessly endangering fellow students and failing to follow my instructions. Potter, you lose 40 points and will also serve 2 weeks' detention." "You don't have his following orders." Lockhart seemed to spit the accuse, "but you were reacting to Malfoy's actions, so I won't be pushing for expulsion either." "And you," Lockhart turned on Snape, "you told him to use those spells and to summon a dangerous snake. If that had bitten anyone, they would be dead from its venom before we got them to the hospital wing. We are going to see the headmaster, and if he refuses to get rid of you, I'll go of the Board of Governors and see you kicked out of here." As Lockhart turned to leave the hall, he noticed a large group of students watching. "All of you get back to your dorms now, or I'll take 15 points from each of you." As the crowd scattered, Lockhart addressed Darren and Malfoy, "Both of you back to your dorms." He then turned to Snape, "You, follow me." Fawkes was resting on his perch feeling wretched. He'd have a burning day soon, and he always felt like crap around them, but that was the price one paid for immortality, of a sort. The twit had done something stupid again, and Fawkes just knew he'd get to see it blow up in the man's face. With luck it would happen before his burning, and therefore he'd have something to take his mind off the horrible feeling of being old. Fawkes looked towards the door when he sensed a mass of anger, power and fear storm up the stairs. He chirped happily when Snape was forced roughly through the door and landed in a heap on the floor. Fawkes turned back to the door trying to see who had manhandled the greasy twat, only to promptly experience his first ever heart attack-induced burning. It was him. Dumbledore had just enough time to note Fawkes' experience of burning before he was hit by wave upon wave of magically laced rage. Judging from Gilderoy's oppression and murderous intent, Severus must have done something wrong. Dumbledore put on his best, grandfatherly, face and prepared to pacify the man Dumbledore suspected of being close to his level, without the Elder Wand of course. Speaking of the wand, it seemed to be reacting to the waves of power washing over him, pulsing a bitter cold through his robes in rhythm. As Dumbledore was putting the final touches to the little speech he'd give to convince Gilderoy to calm down, the other man spoke in a tone as cold as a Dementor's breath. "This man endangered students in a juvenile attempt to make Darren Potter look foolish. Fire him," Lockhart said in an unnaturally calm voice. Dumbledore began to wonder if Gilderoy had a natural affinity for ice-based magic, as the temperature had dropped several degrees since he'd entered and frost was forming on the windows. "Perhaps you should start from the beginning and tell me what happened," Dumbledore said, silently wondering what Severus had done this time. Gilderoy began to explain exactly what had happened with the dueling club, paying extra attention to Snape's apparent refusal to follow the plan Phileas and Gilderoy had come up with. He did pause momentarily in his rant against Severus to have a go at Dumbledore for telling Phileas to let Severus fill in for him. He mentioned how Severus attempted to seriously harm him while demonstrating the disarming spell, and then how he deliberately paired up Darren and Draco, two students who despise each other, to demonstrate Dumbledore felt that Gilderoy was overacting until he heard how Severus had advised young Draco to use certain spells, including Serpensortia. While I think you may have been a little harsh with the punishments. The headmaster began slowly. I can see your point, they were warned and did risk others with their wayward spells. Dumbledore paused to look at Severus, who had recovered from his manhandling and taken to standing against one of the walls partly cloaked in shadows, and rather far from Gilderoy. As for Severus, I'll admit he acted foolishly, but I cannot, in fact will not, fire him. Dumbledore saw Severus smirk at Gilderoy as he spoke. Although Gilderoy's comeback wiped the smirk from his face, and worried Dumbledore greatly. Then, I'll go above you, came Gilderoy's rather calm, if forced, reply. The Board of Governors have the power to remove staff members if justifiable reasons are given. And even ignoring tonight, I'm sure I'll be able to get hundreds of cases of favoritism, discrimination and poor safety practices, this year alone. While I'll admit Severus can come across as overly generous to Slytherin, I know for a fact he doesn't discriminate against others. Dumbledore began to defend the potion master only for Lockhart to cut across him. That mark on his arm begs to differ. Gilderoy snapped. I was there the day he called Evans a mudblood in front of half our year. The man discriminates against any not from Slytherin, especially those from Gryffindor and Muggle families. Gilderoy calmed himself before continuing. I may even push for your removal. Maybe that way we'll get someone who will actually do something about these attacks. Or are you and your old friend, Grindelwald, closer than we thought? Dumbledore didn't know what caused it. Was it the threat of being removed? The slight at his preferences? Or that he didn't care for Muggles? Whatever it was, Dumbledore shot to his feet with wand in hand in rage. However, as soon as his wand was leveled at Gilderoy, he was banished backwards and disarmed. A small, detached part of his mind noted that Gilderoy Lockhart must have an unbelievable affinity for ice and cold if the severe freeze or burn and possible frostbite on his right hand and chest were anything to go by. Do not threaten me, ever, Gilderoy growled. His eyes flickered to the Elder Wand, lying near his feet. Dumbledore saw as recognition. Realization and confusion briefly passed across the other man's face before he kicked the wand back to its owner, muttering, Elder Wood, interesting. With that, Gilderoy turned on his heel and felt. At the door he did however report on one other fact about the disaster at the club. You'll need to run damage control, otherwise people will have Potter pegged as the heir by breakfast. Boy sure picked a crappy time to reveal he's a Parselmouth. As Loki predicted, rumors of Darren's ancestry had spread like wildfire. The fact that Justin Finch Fletchley had been petrified less than 24 hours after Darren appeared to sick a snake on him did not help. The fact that a ghost had also been affected caused a panic. This panic worked to Loki's advantage when we negotiated with Dumbledore. The old man was desperate to prevent him contacting the governors. He'd also argued in defense of Snape continuing to work at the school, but Loki refused to even entertain the notion. The man was a risk to the students and had to be dealt with. Although Loki was forced to admit that replacing him this late in the school year would be difficult, and so settled for him being replaced over the summer break. Although in exchange for this concession Loki was given carte blanche in dealing with the chamber, whatever creature was in it and whoever was responsible for opening it. Nothing else worth noting appeared to occur over the break, apart from the appearance of a catgirl on Christmas Day. Loki laughed himself raw and made a point of sending up a gift basket full of cream and fish with a "Get Well Soon" card. He also included a small book detailing the historical usage of animal-based polyjuice potion. All seemed quiet after the students returned, apart from some minor vandalism in the Gryffindor's tower. At least everything seemed fine until the Gryffindor-Hufflepuff match. Loki had only just sat down when McGonagall came half marching, half running onto the pitch carrying an enormous purple megaphone. This match has been cancelled. McGonagall repeated through the megaphone over and over again. All students are to make their way back to their house common rooms, where their head of house will provide further instructions. Loki was out of his seat and on his way down through the stand before anyone else had finished registering what had been said. He caught up with McGonagall as she told Ron and Darren to follow her. "Minerva, what's happened?" Loki asked breathlessly. "Another attack." "Near the library," came the weary reply. It was Ms. Granger. Darren and Ron's faces became masks of horror when she named Hermione. "Is she?" Loki had to ask. "Petrified. Like the others," she told him as they entered the hospital wing. "We found something strange, a small mirror, near her. Do you have any idea why she'd have had it, boys?" "A mirror," Loki mused. Why a mirror? It took Loki a few moments to connect the dots into something that made sense. Clever girl. "Did you say something, Gilderoy?" McGonagall asked. "Yeah, look, gotta run. Need to see Sylve. I think I've worked you why no one's dead," Loki called as he fled the hospital wing. Sylve Kettleburn had more scars than many of the Aesir Loki had fought alongside, and that was saying something. The man did, however, know his creatures. The reflection? Retain the power of a basilisk's stare? Surely you're joking? The man laughed, as Loki e-planed his theory. "Think about it," Loki countered. "The Gorgon is vulnerable to its reflection because it contains its power, so why not a basilisk's stare be as dangerous?" "Well, no one's ever tested it," Sylve mused, stroking his chin. "Well, how did each victim see a reflection?" The cat, Mrs. Norris, was petrified looking into the water from the nearby bathroom. The prefect, Penelope Clearwater, was looking at the tray she was carrying. Mr. Finch Fletchley was looking through that ghost. Nearly headless Nick, Sylve supplied. "Right, him." Ms. Granger had a small mirror, checking around corners to avoid it. Loki continued. The events seemed to fit and he just needed someone else to agree. "It could work. I'd advise you to speak with Hagrid, just to be sure," Sylve concluded after a moment's consideration. "Why should I speak with Rubeus?" Loki asked in confusion. "Well, he knows more about the little beasties than I do, and well." Kettleburn looked nervous. "You know, they say he was responsible last time." Loki thanked his fellow professor and set off to speak with his second favorite half-giant. Hagrid was in the process of putting a slab of fruitcake on a plate, when there was a knock on the door. Hagrid dropped the fruitcake. Darren and Ron exchanged panic-stricken looks, then threw Darren's invisibility cloak over themselves and retreated into a corner. Hagrid checked that they were hidden, seized his crossbow and flung open the door. "Good evening, Rubeus," Professor Lockhart said, his normal cheer missing from his voice. "May I come in? I need to ask a few questions about the chamber." "Now look, I had nothing to do with it," Hagrid snapped. I know. Lockhart tried to calm the huge man. "But I need to know about what happened last time. Minerva is busy arranging suitable patrols and escorts for the students and the headmaster is in a meeting. That makes you my best chance of getting these answered and, one step closer to solving this before someone dies again." "Oh, sorry." Hagrid apologized. Come in. I'll pop the kettle on. I'll get the tea, you just try and remember as many details as you can," Lockhart told him as he stepped in and made his way over to the fire. Just as Hagrid sat down, there was another knock at the door. This time it was Dumbledore and the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge. "Bad business, Hagrid," said Fudge in a clipped tone. "Very bad business. Had to come 3 attacks on Muggle-borns. Things have gone far enough. Ministry's got act." As both Hagrid and Dumbledore protested the man's innocence, Professor Lockhart finished making the tea. "Look at it from my point of view," said Fudge, fidgeting with his bowler. "I'm under a lot of pressure. Got to be seen to be doing something. If it turns out it wasn't Hagrid, he'll be back and no more said. But I've got to take him. Got to. Wouldn't be doing my duty." "So in other words, it's a publicity stunt," Lockhart cut in as he handed Hagrid and Dumbledore mugs of tea. He then sat on Hagrid's bed and sipped from his own mug. "If this is what our ties pay for, I want a refund." "How dare you?" Fudge snapped, voice full with shock that someone would say such a thing to his face. Fudge looked like he'd continue but was cut off by a loud rap at the door and Lucius Malfoy entering the hut. Already here, Fudge, he said approvingly. Good, good. What are you doing here? Said Hagrid furiously. Get out of my house. My dear man, please believe me, I have no pleasure at all in being in your... Did you call this a house? Said Lucius Malfoy, sneering as he looked around the small cabin. Simply called at the school and was told the headmaster was here. And what exactly did you want with me, Lucius? Dumbledore asked. He spoke politely, but there was a fire blazing in his eyes that neither of the boys had ever seen. Dreadful thing, Dumbledore, said Lucius lazily, taking a long roll of parchment out of his pocket. But the governors feel it's time for you to step aside. This is an order of suspension. You'll find all 12 signatures on it. I'm afraid we feel you're losing your touch. How many attacks have there been now? Another one this afternoon, wasn't there? At this rate there'll be no Muggle-borns left at Hogwarts, and we all know what an awful loss that would be to the school. Oh, now, see here, Lucius. Fudge spoke up, looking alarmed. Dumbledore suspended. No last thing we want just now. The appointment, or suspension, of the headmaster is a matter for the governors, Fudge, said Lucius smoothly. More like whoever lines their pockets with gold. Lockhart countered just as smoothly, causing Lucius to jump. It seems he hadn't spotted the professor sitting on the bed. Lockhart's comment sparked of something of a standoff between Hagrid, who refused to allow Dumbledore to leave, and Lucius. The standoff only ended when Dumbledore agreed to leave and, with his eyes flickering to where the boys stood hidden, said, "You will find that I will only truly have left this school when none here are loyal to me. You will also find that help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it." With that the adults began to move out of the hut, with Hagrid saying that anyone looking for answers should just follow the spiders and that Fang would need feeding. "I'll see to it personally, Rubius," Lockhart assured him as he took up the rear of the group. "Damn it, I left my cloak in on the back of the chair. I'll grab it. Lock up and follow on up." Lockhart watched the group move up towards the castle while he cleared the table. Once he was sure they were too far to notice, he spoke. "So boys, I trust what you heard will be kept quiet." A moment passed before Darren spoke up. "Yes, sir." "Good, now stay under that and follow me back up," Lockhart said as he moved towards the door. Summer was creeping over the grounds around the castle. Sky and lake alike turned periwinkle blue, and flowers large as cabbages burst into bloom in the greenhouses. But with Dumbledore gone, fear had spread as never before, so that the sun warming the castle walls outside seemed to stop at the mullioned windows. There was barely a face to be seen in the school that didn't look worried and tense, and any laughter that ran through the corridors sounded shrill and unnatural and was quickly stifled. All students were required to travel in groups and had to be escorted from class to class by the staff. The only students not bothered by this appeared to be the Slytherins. And even then those who had Muggle relatives looked somewhat uneasy. Loki had gone over Dumbledore's comment of help being offered to those who asked, but couldn't work out if he was referring to himself or the boys. "It must have been to me," Loki said as he wandered the halls, keeping an eye out for trouble. "I mean, he couldn't expect the boys to do anything, but if it was to me, why not direct it to me instead of to the room at large?" Loki was on his way to the staff room, sending out small pulses of magic as he went, to check in and report that everything was okay, when something passed him in the corner. It was familiar, and very old, magic. Several deep breaths and Loki knew who was hidden under the magic. "By Ymir, the brat must have a death wish," Loki muttered as he debated with himself. Should he catch the boys and try to bluff his way through explaining how he found them under whatever spell they were using to hide? Or, sneakily follow them and see what happens? The mature, rational and rule-following side of Loki's personality had been brutally murdered by the side that felt, because it's funny is as good a reason as any, long ago, and the answer was clear. That said, Loki still came up with about 2 valid reasons to stop them before he broke down in a fit of laughter. He set off to report in and then follow the boys. "What was with your cloak earlier?" Ron asked as the boys strode across the black grass. "I mean, why would the cloak just start getting really cold all of a sudden?" "I dunno," Darren replied. "I'll have to ask Dad if it ever happened to him." The boys grow silent as they approached Hagrid's house, which appeared sad and sorry looking with its blank windows. Fang went mad with joy when they entered the hut, forcing the boys to feed him some of Hagrid's fudge to glue his teeth together and shut him up. With Fang in dashing ahead of them and back, the boys set off into the forest with their wands light. The boys had caught sight of a small trail of spiders shortly after entering the forest and had, following Hagrid's advice, set off after them. About half an hour after entering the forest, they heard the galloping of hooves off in the distance. Darren realized that the centaurs must be near. As he turned to Ron, preparing to suggest they ask for help, he heard the centaurs cry out in pain, then anger and then terror before stampeding away. Instead he said, "Let's avoid that direction, shall we?" "Yeah, mate." Ron agreed, nodding his head as fast as he could. They continued into the forest, trying to prevent their imagination from conjuring up images of what could have spooked the centaurs. They failed. Loki had been following the boys through the forest, just out of sight for a while, and was beginning to get bored. Sure, he'd killed a few trolls Darren and Ron could have run into, but it wasn't really a challenge. He was honestly considering setting off to find something worth fighting when he heard the galloping of hooves drawing nearer. Loki groaned loudly as a dozen centaurs came trampling out of the bushes around him, bows drawn and arrows leveled at him. "Look around. There's no homesteads to raid or women to rape, so piss of," Loki said to who appeared to be the leader of the group, contempt dripping from his tongue. "How dare you speak to yous like that, human?" snarled the leader. "You and your kind are not welcome in our forest." "Not welcome in your forest, stupid mule." Loki laughed, contempt still tainting his voice. "I can go wherever I wish, whenever I wish, and no pony with an overinflated ego and a rather pitiful bow will tell me otherwise." Loki bit back. A howl of pain was an arrow embedded itself in his shoulder. Loki was mad, and when Loki Lawfason was mad, entire bloodlines tended to die. He reached up to burn shut the wound, muttering about learning healing magic someday. Loki began to weave a simple illusion. To the centaurs, Loki's body seemed to crack like ice before exploding outward in a storm of shards and mist. While they were startled, Loki lashed out with Graham, which he kept attached to his belt under a glamour at all times these days, and severed the lower arms of the centaur responsible for Loki's newest scar. As the mist cleared, the second part of Loki's illusion kicked in. To the centaurs, there was no longer a human man but an armored monster before them. At a little under 7 foot and clad from head to toe in leather and mail armor, with the hide of a bear as a cloak and a menacing iron helm encasing his head, Loki's true form was a truly terrifying sight. He laughed as they all but trampled each other in their haste to flee. As he dropped the illusion, Loki realized that he'd lost the boys. By the time Loki managed to find the boys again, they had somehow gotten themselves caught by Acromantula, who seemed to be preparing to eat them. Loki cursed and acted as quick as he could, casting a powerful illuminating spell into the middle of the hollow and startling the creatures. The boys used the distraction to flee and disappeared into the forest. Loki prepared to follow but stopped when he remembered Hagrid's comment about spiders. "No, Rubeus, even you couldn't be that crazy," Loki muttered before calling out, "Hello. Do any of you know a Rubeus Hagrid?" "Who is there?" came the reply from the largest one, or at least that's who Loki thought replied. "Look, answer the question. Do you know him or not?" Loki shouted. "Yes. Now who is there?" the aged creature called again. Loki jumped down into the hollow and approached slowly. "Gilderoy Lockhart. I work up in the school. I'm a friend of Rubeus." Loki introduced himself. "Listen, I really need to know about the Chamber of Secrets. Now can you help me, or am I wasting my time here?" The blind creature, the eyes were pale unlike the others, seemed to communicate with the younger ones scattered around the hollow. Loki felt uneasy, as it was rare for him to be in a position where he didn't understand every word spoken in his presence. Finally the spider spoke. "We do not speak of it. Never will I speak of it. I am sorry, I would not tell the others who came before you, and I will not tell you." Here genuine sorrow entered the great spider's voice. "And now you must die. My children have held back enough and the others escaped somehow. Goodbye, friend of Hagrid." Loki watched as the surrounding acromantula began to close in. With a small sigh, he slowly raised his left hand and began to weave a spell. He quickly dropped his hand as the spell was finished and flash froze the entire hollow along with the surrounding area. All the acromantula were frozen in place, like statues of ice. Loki waved his hand and thawed the ice. Every one of the giant spiders fell to the ground dead. As Loki walked out of the clearing, he stopped to study some of the webbing. Like silk. He mused to himself. I wonder if I could get some of it made into a dress. I'm sure Sigyn would love something rare and eotic like this. With that thought in mind, Loki gathered up as much of the webbing as he could and set off for the castle. Having failed to get anything useful out of the giant spiders, and having decided to give Rubeus a good kicking, Loki spent the next few weeks poring over everything he'd learned. He'd even approached McGonagall about the possibility of it being a basilisk. She threw it back in his face, saying something about basilisks being barren and how it's impossible for something to survive for more than 1,000 years, Phineas occluded of course. She told him to just carry on with patrolling the school and escorting students. Finally a break came in the monotony when at breakfast one morning McGonagall stood up. I have good news, she said, causing the great hall to erupt. When everyone had calmed down, she continued. Professor Sprout has informed me that the mandrakes are ready for cutting at last. Tonight, we will be able to revive those who have been petrified. I need hardly remind you all that one of them may well be able to tell us who, or what, attacked them. I am hopeful that this dreadful year will end with our catching the culprit. 100 Galleons says at least one of them reports seeing a big-ing snake, or something to that effect. Loki whispered as she sat back down. Not this again, Gilderoy. McGonagall sighed. If it will teach you that you don't know everything, then fine. 100 Galleons. Loki sat in his office. He'd spent every night since meeting the spider patrolling the halls after the others had stopped, and even his stamina was at its limits. I don't have a class until after break. I may as well catch some shut-eye. Loki yawned before closing his eyes. Loki's rest was interrupted by McGonagall's voice magically booming throughout the castle. All students to return to their house dormitories at once. All teachers return to the staff room, immediately, please. Damn it. Loki muttered as he grabbed Graham's scabbard and attached it to his belt. He snatched up his wand and set off to find out what happened now. Sorry, dozed off. What did I miss? Loki asked as he entered the staff room. Just the man. Snape sneered. The very man. A girl has been snatched by the monster, Lockhart. Taken into the Chamber of Secrets itself. Your moment has come at last. I'm sorry, what? Came Loki's reply. That's right, Gilderoy. Chipped in Professor Sprout. Weren't you saying last night that you knew the location of the chamber's entrance? What? No, I said. Loki began. Yes, didn't you say that you had a reasonable guess of what you'd be fighting as well? Interrupted Professor Flitwick. No, I said I knew what was in it. As Loki said this, he shot a dirty look at McGonagall. And that I have a pretty good guess of where to look for the entrance. If I knew where it was, I'd have called in the ministry officials who are trained to kill these kind of things as backup, and the bloody thing already. Right, the rest of you ensure the students are completely safe. Minerva, come with me for a moment. You too as well, Potter, Weasley. What are you two doing here? Growled Snape as Darren and Ron eyed the wardrobe they'd hidden in. We came to tell Professor McGonagall what we learned, but we kinda panicked when the announcement went out, Darren admitted. Whatever. I need Darren there to open the chamber. Professor Lockhart said you can share what you learned on the way. Where are we going? Asked Ron, who was worried about his sister. I've got 2 letters that need sending. Fail safes should I die down there before saving the girl and killing the monster. Lockhart told him. Minerva is going to mail them. You'll go with her so that she can escort you to your dorm afterwards. I need Darren to open the chamber via Parseltongue. Now, what did Hermione discover? That it's a basilisk in the chamber and it's using the school's plumbing to move around. Darren told him, wondering why Lockhart was smirking at McGonagall. And we think the entrance to the chamber is located in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Which one's that again? Lockhart asked. The girls' bathroom on the 3rd floor. Ron answered. Where Mrs. Norris was found. 3rd floor. Well, I guess you can't be right all the time, Lockhart said as they entered his office. He strode over to the desk and picked up 2 sealed letters. Right, Minerva. Send them straight away. Darren, let's go see if you're right. The 4 arrived at Moaning Myrtle's bathroom and Lockhart entered first, to make sure it was safe for the others. When he was sure it was safe, he called the others in. Myrtle? Myrtle? Darren called. Myrtle, please. We need to ask you something really important. What? Myrtle snapped as she rose up out of a toilet. What do you want? To ask you how you died, said Darren. You could see Myrtle's entire face change at once. You'd swear no one had ever asked her such a flattering question. Oh, it was horrible, she said, truly enjoying the memory. It happened right in here. I died in this very cubicle. I remember it so well. I'd hidden because Olive Hornby was teasing me about my glasses. The door was locked and I was crying. Then I heard somebody come in. They said something funny. A different language, I think it must have been. Anyway, what really got me was that it was a boy speaking. So I unlocked the door, to tell him to go away and use his own toilet, and then I died. How did you die? Lockhart asked, an uneasy look on his face. No idea. Myrtle told them, in a hushed tone. I just remember seeing a pair of great big yellow eyes. My whole body sort of seized up and then I was floating away. She looked dreamily at Darren. Where did you see these eyes? Lockhart cut in. And would you say they're attached to a big ink snake? Somewhere over there. Myrtle replied, pointing vaguely in the direction of the sinks. And I don't know, maybe. Professor Lockhart began to e-mine the sinks and called Darren over. Right, try saying open, he told him as he pointed at a small carving of a snake. It took him a few tries before it worked and the sink sank into the ground, leaving a large pipe. EPO said for someone to slide down. Right. Minerva, I'll leave the boys and the letters in your capable hands, Lockhart said as he positioned himself above the opening. Ha ha ha. Looks like I'm going into the belly of the beast. And with luck right out the demon's ass. With that he dropped down. The tunnel Loki found himself in was long, dark and littered with the remains of a millennia of devoured animals. It was also somewhat cold with a severe draft, which Loki felt diminished the overall charm somewhat. After wandering for a short while, Loki came to a pair of large serpent statues carved into the wall, a huge emerald in each eye. You'll fetch a pretty penny, Loki said as he pried the jewels from their resting places. After pocketing them, Loki forced the door open and found himself in a long, dimly lit chamber. Towering stone pillars entwined with more carved serpents rose to support a ceiling lost in darkness and cast long black shadows through the odd, greenish gloom that filled the place. Sal, old fellow, you must have had issues, Loki observed as he neared the chamber-sized statue of Slytherin, which in of itself was not that flattering, to be honest. He appeared ancient and almost monkey-like. A beard longer than Dumbledore's fell almost to the bottom of the statue's stone robes, and there between its huge feet lay Ginny Weasley. All right, Mr. or Mrs. Eyre. Come out wherever you are, Loki called as he slowly approached the unmoving girl. Mr. Eyre, a soft voice said. It came from a tall, dark-haired boy who was leaning against a nearby pillar. He was strangely blurred around the edges, as though he was being seen through a rather pathetic glamour. His robes had a faint green trim that marked him as a Slytherin student. And you are not who I was expecting, to be honest. I had hoped Potter would come down. Who are you anyway? One of the staff? It's generally considered polite to introduce oneself before asking another for his name, Loki told the apparition as he e-mined Ginny. She won't wake, the boy said, and my name was Tom Riddle, now yours. At the moment it's Gilderoy Lockhart, Loki told the annoying boy. And what do you mean, she won't wake? She poured her soul into me, well, most of it anyway, Tom said smugly. How? Was Loki's guarded response. Well, somehow she got her hands on my diary. Tom spoke as he pointed towards a small, leather book lying near Ginny. She's been writing in it for months, telling me all her pitiful worries and woes. How her brothers would tease her, or how she had to come to school in second-hand robes, or how she didn't think the famous Darren Potter would ever even like her. Worthless really, only good for allowing my rebirth. You see, as she poured out her deepest fears and darkest secrets into me, I got stronger and could start to pour a little of myself back. Okay, so the diary lets you steal a little girl's innocence. And though I could be creepy. Loki muttered under his breath before asking a question. What did you mean your name was Tom Riddle, and why did you want Darren here instead? I wanted him here to find out how a baby with no extraordinary magical talent managed to defeat the greatest wizard of all time. I wanted to know how he escaped with nothing but a scar, while Lord Voldemort's powers were destroyed. Tom practically spat. And as to my name, well, watch. Loki watched as Tom produced a wand, which he vaguely remembered Ginny using during class, and began to write 3 shimmering words in the air. Tom Marvolo Riddle. Then he waved the wand once and the letters of his name rearranged themselves. I am Lord Voldemort, you see, he whispered, trying to be dramatic. It was a name I created in school. I mean, I couldn't go around using my filthy Muggle father's name forever, could I? In these veins runs the blood of Salazar Slytherin. No, I fashioned myself a new name. One I knew wizards everywhere would one day fear to even speak, when I became the greatest sorcerer in the world. Yep, definitely going for dramatic. Loki gave a polite cough before speaking. Actually, you're not. Not what? Snapped Tom. Not the greatest sorcerer in the world. Loki told him. Actually, what is the difference between a sorcerer and a wizard anyway? You know what, never mind, it doesn't matter as you're not the greatest one. Haha, let me guess, Dumbledore? Tom mocked. Actually, I was thinking of myself, Loki told him without a hint of humility. You, what makes you worthy of the title? Tom roared. Loki smiled before replying, well, I've got a clean driving record, I was student of the week that one time, and oh yeah, I'm a god. WH. What? Tom stammered. Well, you've had your dramatic introduction, Loki said in a bored tone. So now it's my turn. I am the mother of Odin's stallion, Sleipnir. I am the father of Fenris God-Eater, of Hel Half-Rotted, and of Jormungand the World Serpent. I am Loki Scarlip, Loki Skywalker, Loki Giant's Child, Loki Lie Smith. I am Loki, who is fire and wit and hate. I am Loki, and I am second to no one. Tom staggered back from Loki in fear. He quickly turned to the statue and cried out in Parseltongue. Speak to me, Slytherin, greatest of the Hogwarts Four. The great statue of Slytherin was opening its mouth, and from deep within came the sound of something stirring. Ha 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 ha, well, Mr. God. Let's see how you handle the power of Salazar Slytherin, Tom cried manically. From the statue's mouth emerged the great basilisk, which to Loki looked an awful lot like his son Jormungand. In fact, the resemblance was so great that, even though he knew how a basilisk was made, Loki would be having words with his son to see if there were any grandchildren he should know about. As the great beast pooled on the ground at the statue's base, Tom looked envious to see the depressingly short fight between serpent and god. He wasn't disappointed. As the snake fired its lethal gaze on Loki, he calmly met its gaze and, while the creature was confused as to why he was still alive, stabbed it in the face with Graham. He made sure to twist the blade a few times to make sure it was dead before removing the blade and shaking the blood off. What? How? Tom stammered. How? God, remember? Loki told him in a rather mocking tone. Now, I'm gonna need a story. Something flashy but simple. I could use this as my way out. Fake the wounds, die of them, and start over as Locke. Tom, who was trembling in pants-staining terror, slowly began to slip away. Hi. Tom, wanna know how Darren survived your piss-poor attack? Loki called out, before blasting the apparition into dust. As Loki set about inflicting realistic wounds that would prove fatal, later he realized how stupid blowing up Tom had been. Crap. Now how do I wake the girl up? The tunnel Loki found himself in was long, dark, and littered with the remains of a millennia of devoured animals. It was also somewhat cold with a severe draft, which Loki felt diminished the overall charm somewhat. After wandering for a short while, Loki came to a pair of large serpent statues carved into the wall, a huge emerald in each eye. "You'll fetch a pretty penny," Loki said as he pried the jewels from their resting places. After pocketing them, Loki forced the door open and found himself in a long, dimly lit chamber. Towering stone pillars entwined with more carved serpents rose to support a ceiling lost in darkness and cast long black shadows through the odd, greenish gloom that filled the place. "Sal, old fellow, you most have had issues," Loki observed as he neared the chamber-sized statue of Slytherin, which in of itself was not that flattering, to be honest. He appeared ancient and almost monkey-like. A beard longer than Dumbledore's fell almost to the bottom of the statue's stone robes, and there between its huge feet lay Ginny Weasley. "All right, Mr. or Mrs. Eyre. Come out wherever you are," Loki called as he slowly approached the unmoving girl. "Mr. Eyre," a soft voice said. It came from a tall, dark-haired boy who was leaning against a nearby pillar. His robes had a faint green trim that marked him as a Slytherin student. "And you are not who I was expecting, to be honest. I had hoped Potter would come down." "Who are you anyway?" "One of the staff." It's generally considered polite to introduce oneself before asking another for his name, Loki told the boy as he e-mined Ginny. "Tom Riddle," the boy replied. "And I'm afraid you're too late to stop me." Loki ignored him as he stared at Ginny. She was cold and unmoving. Loki's eyes noted the traces of magic linking her to a small diary laying on the ground near her hand. Tom continued to blather on behind him, but Loki was only listening, just paying attention. Ginny's life force had been drained by the book, but Loki had no idea why. He finally turned to face Tom when the boy admitted to the secret of his return. "You see, as she poured out her deepest fears and darkest secrets into me, I got stronger and could start to pour a little of myself back," Tom boasted. "I grow stronger enough to draw her life to me, to take what I needed to fashion myself a new body. Now, soon the world will tremble the news of my return." "Your return?" Loki said, his voice low and hollow. "Sorry, but I've never even heard of you." "You've never heard the name of my filthy, Muggle father, you mean?" Tom spat, Loki's apparent boredom angering him. Loki watched as Tom produced a wand, which he vaguely remembered Ginny using during class, and began to write 3 shimmering words in the air. "Tom Marvolo Riddle." Then he waved the wand once and the letters of his name rearranged themselves. "I am Lord Voldemort, you see," he whispered. "It was a name I created in school. I mean, I couldn't go around using my filthy Muggle father's name forever, could I? In these veins runs the blood of Salazar Slytherin. No, I fashioned myself a new name. When I knew wizards everywhere would one day fear to even speak, when I became the greatest sorcerer in the world." "Well, Mr. Greatest Sorcerer in the world, let's see you leave this chamber alive," Loki spoke in a cold, bitter voice. "Epelomalius." Tom's robes erupted into a fireball and causing him to panic. As he flailed about, Loki took aim and cast a quick confringo. The blasting curse destroyed the wand Tom was using, as well as the hand holding it. Loki extinguished the flames and began to mock Tom. "Well, come on, Mr. Sorcerer. Show me your power," Loki sneered as he advanced on the wounded youth. "Banish me across the room, turn my heart to stone. Do something." Tom staggered back from Loki in fear. He quickly turned to the statue and cried out in Parseltongue. "Speak to me, Slytherin, greatest of the Hogwarts Four." As the great statue began to vomit out the basilisk, Tom reeled slightly. "Ha, Slytherin's power will finish you. Ha ha, I'll make you sorry for daring to challenge me." Loki shut him up with a quick sectum sempra directed at his legs, the spell carving deep gashes into Tom's thighs and leaving him unable to support his weight on them. He then turned and faced the basilisk. Had Loki been calmer, he would have noted the similarities between it and his serpentine son. When the beast realized its eyes would not work, it lunged forward, meaning to bite him and use its powerful venom. Loki neatly sidestepped the attack and drew Graham. He used the beast's own momentum and Graham's unnatural cutting power to slice the beast from its snout, all along its flank, to its tail. As it convulsed in agony, Loki pierced its skull and brain with his sword, killing the millennia-old creature. Tom could only stare in horror as Loki leveled his wand at him and cast Avada Kedavra. Thanks for watching. See you soon with part 2.